Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I appreciate you all joining me on this show, on this episode. We have another damn good show for you today. And I want to thank all of you for joining me. I see we have very many people in the chat already. Shout out to all of you. And thank you for joining me. This show is growing. We are trying to hit 50K. We are on our way to 50K. I don't know what I'm going to do for the 50K celebration, halfway to 100,000. That is my objective. That is the objective that I've set for this channel. Hopefully more, but at the very least, that is the goal that I'm trying to reach. I would like YouTube to send me that golden, whatever the hell that is, so I can have sitting behind me every time I do this show. Either way, thank you for joining me. A lot of news. And a lot of the news still revolves around what Donald Trump is effectively doing around the world in regards to the tariffs, but not just the tariffs, the threat he's leveling also at Iran. Negotiations with Russia seem to have, if not stalled, at the very least seem to be on two separate tracks between negotiations in regards to bilateral relations between Russia and opening relations with Russia. And on the other side, Ukraine. The Ukraine side seemed to have stalled. The other side seems to be moving along, which is kind of interesting, right? Like, yes, for all of the talk about, oh, if they launch an offensive, maybe they're not interested in peace. Dude, winning the war. Why would a side that's winning the war be interested in your panicky negotiations to try to get a ceasefire without dealing with the real context of why the war started in the first place, right? So, I don't get the sense that they care. Yeah, I think they care about having a partner in the U.S. where they don't want to necessarily be at odds. But I would wager to you that they care about the issue of security for the Russian state more. And part of that has to do with normalizing relations in some way. But if Europe is not going to be in a position of being honest about how the war started and being willing to normalize relations, then you have to settle for what you settle for, which is a buffer zone and increased military production to be able to secure the integrity of your state at the barrel of a gun. That's life. It's about power, right? That's what I've learned. It's about power, not about right and wrong, about what you can defend and what you can take, what you can keep, the integrity of your state, and how you defend the integrity of your state. It's just that. Everything else matters less. That's what it seems to be, the context of the world to which we live in. So that's my assumption of the context of the world we live in. I want to start on something. I do not want to dwell on this. And I will be very transparent, as I typically am with my audience. I did a video yesterday on Ritter. It did not occur to me, and maybe it should have, that people would go on social media and harass Ritter about coming on my show. The point of the video was not him coming on the show. And to be very, very honest with you, I had qualms about doing that video. My qualms, and even after the fact, I asked myself, what was your motivation for doing the video? Was the motivation, okay, he's not coming on the show and you feel some kind of way about it? But then as I thought about it, Alexander McCurris, Glenn Deasy may never come on the show, Aaron Matei may never come back on the show. And I still take away this notion of these people are doing God's work. If Mark Sloboda hit me up and say, I'm never coming back on your show for whatever particular reason, I can't see myself making a video going after Mark Sloboda. So I can't lay it on that as a rationale. even if I felt some kind of way about the I'm not coming back on the show. I think more than anything else, what got me was you've platformed this guy for years. You talked to this guy for years. You shared him with your audience for years. Combined with, we killed 1 million people in Iraq. We destroyed Libya to the point where they were selling black slaves. We knocked over the government of Syria after working in a clandestine way decades to do so, spending billions of dollars to do it. We destroyed Afghanistan. And as Wesley Clark pointed out, the US government objective through continuity of multiple administrations was to take out all of these states, with Iran being the last one. I sat at the helm of a radio station, shocked that we pushed the country into a war where they were murdering each other, shooting each other in the face. Hundreds of thousands of people slaughtered, just evaporated, wiped off the face of the earth. And I sat there asking myself, why is this happening? Like, I don't think you understand. That is a mind-blowing thing. We don't see it. We see images of drones blowing stuff up and all, but we don't see it firmly in the way that it is. I take this seriously. If US president, after previous US presidents knocked over governments, is threatening to destroy a country of 80 to 90 million people and kill untold numbers of people, the same president, by the way, that is murdering civilians in Yemen and posting it on Twitter as a celebratory thing, and for that matter, is funding a country that is murdering people in mass, I take it very seriously. Like, how can I not? We have a track record of doing this stuff. And because we have a track record of doing this stuff, for somebody to be on my show with a take that seems to align itself with the Trumpian argument of negotiate with me or I'll destroy you. And the context of it is he's sitting arm in arm with a genocidal maniac that has been invading country after country after country, murdering people in mass, raping, pillaging, killing people, executing aid workers, bombing hospitals, and committing a literal genocide, as it has an open-air ghetto in one place and an apartheid state in another. And he's arm in arm with that guy. And the context of it is as if Iran is the problem. Okay, I've seen this before. The weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It's the same argument that is being made here for Iran, even though it is understood, A, there's a fatwa against nuclear weapons. If Iran wanted to nuke, they could have made one already. They haven't. And even our own government comes out and says they're not trying to. And yet, you're arguing this takeoff where Iran should give up its sovereignty in order to, make a deal with Donald Trump. Oh, by the way, after it threw away the last deal. I take it seriously. It's not conjecture. It's not intellectual. This is not a conceptual conversation. This is a conversation of things that have taken place in the past to the tune of millions of people dead without any consequences for those million people being dead, short of the $10 trillion that we spent to murder and slaughter those people. If I have a guest on my show that evolves their point of view, where they try to rationalize it, I'm just being realistic, as they sent for Trump's argument, I think I have qualms with that. And I guess I felt weirdly guilty only because Ritter has been on the show so often, I consider him a friend of the show. And so while my ire may be up in the video, as I'm going after him pretty vigorously, I feel some kind of way after the fact that I even had to go after him for it. And I think to myself, if this was any random person, if this was John Bolton, because that is the John Bolton's argument, right? We're America. We get to set the context. We get to decide what happens. We get to set the outcomes. That is a John Bolton argument. I would have no qualms in going after John Bolton. Zero. No guilt. I wouldn't care. I would do it in a heartbeat and have a beer after. I don't even drink beer. Smoke a joint after. Wouldn't think twice. On this, I did think twice. Every point I made was correct. It's not that. The issue is that a social media relationship is created when a person comes on your show. That is not to be confused with friendship, but it is a relationship of sorts. I appreciate Ritter for coming on the show. He has been very generous with his time over the years. And in many respects, I felt like we're an ally in regards to a similar cause. When Trump got elected, that broke down. His take on Russia and Ukraine may be correct, but again, it aligns with the Trump administration's position on Ukraine. If his positions have changed to align themselves more with Trump, then that is broken down. The issue of being allies is not related to us being buddies. It's related to a higher cause. Are we doing God's work or not? In this case, I find it to be not, in which case the video was made. I appreciate Ritter for coming on the show. The point is not that he's not coming back. That is not the point. That doesn't matter. That's his discretion, just like it's my discretion. I want to nail that down because I don't want people going after him saying, hey, why aren't you coming back on Jamal shows? It's irrelevant. He can't have any reason. Oh, I don't like his suit. Okay, that's a reason. It doesn't matter. It's the reason that I made the video in regards to his position. I take issue with his position, not that he's not coming on the show. Those are different things. Just want to make that very clear. I want to get to my guests. Like I said, I don't want to dwell. Dmitri Lascaris, the man of the hour, the man himself. Dimitri is a lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec in 2020. He ran for the leadership of the Green Party in Canada. And again, a good friend of the show that I am deeply appreciative for coming on. How you doing, man? You doing okay?
Hey, man, I'm doing as well as I can in this time of genocide, Jamarl. It's not easy for any of us who care about humanity, you know. But I can't complain. I'm relatively fortunate, so I really can't complain.
I feel you on that. I think my mom would say my mood is darkened. My take on reality is darkened. The things that I thought was allowed in reality or wasn't allowed in reality, apparently they are. Which, regardless if I look at it, is real, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a dark time.
I never thought I'd live to see what we're seeing today. I mean, I knew Western governments were capable of horrible things, but this was unexpected, shall we say?
The thing is, I grew up in America thinking Europe was more rational, more ethical. I mean, after all, they have a healthcare system, they have an education system. We don't have this stuff in America. On some level, there's an implicit thing of, okay, at the very least, we care about our own people. Not so much. Not so much. I will be honest with you. I'm very shocked, and I've been shocked a few times. The war in Ukraine shocked me that we'd push a government into something like that. The genocide in Israel, that this would just be allowed and supported, that has shocked me to no end. My view of the world has shifted.
Yeah, and the crushing of what democracy, we're watching that too. Sorry to interrupt, but I had to just add that.
Yeah, the Romania thing, not get over preventing Romania from having their governments, putting Le Pen in jail. All of that stuff is just outlandish. Not putting people in jail for free speech issues. I mean, it's just amazing. Let me ask you this. Yeah. Before I get to anything else, I have to go to Canada and the tariffs. How is Canada dealing with Donald Trump effectively no longer being a quote unquote partner with Canada in this?
There is a lot of hostility in Canada right now towards the U.S. government.
You don't say.
Yes, a lot. I've never seen this kind of hostility in my life. Yeah, and I'm sure you're not surprised. A lot of people wouldn't be surprised by that. Generally, Canadians have had quite positive impression of the US, the people of America, but, also the government. Most Canadians, I think, have had a generally favorable impression, and, that was true, uh, shockingly, even throughout the Biden-supported genocide, you know? I'm sure that, Biden's favorability rating took a hit in Canada, during, the last year of his presidency, but, even then, I think a majority of Canadians continued to have a relatively positive view of the US government, shockingly. Um,
Yeah.
Now, though, I think very, very few people, I mean, maybe 10%, 15%, and, people are very worried, because, Canada's, largest trading partner by far is the United States. The trade with the United States, I think I can't remember the exact number, it was something like 50 or 60% of Canadian GDP. That's how big it is,
Mhm.
whereas US trade with Canada is something like 15% of its GDP. So, huge reduction in trade between Canada and the US is going to have a much bigger impact on Canada than it will on
Right.
the United States. And then there's all this, people being deported and this talk about Canada being, made the 51st state. There was a poll done recently which showed that 88% of Canadians, after this, Trump said Canada's gonna be the 51st state, 88% of Canadians, uh, said no. Well, they want nothing to do with this idea. They want Canada to remain an independent state. And even in the most pro-American province, in Canada, which is Alberta, it's the most conservative right-leaning province. The number that were hotly opposed to Canada joining with the United States was in excess of 80%. So, not a lot of love for the US government right now.
I don't blame him, considering he's effectively dealing with their economy. What is that? It's the economy, stupid. And if you're doing something to damage people's livelihoods, they're going to feel some kind of way about the fact that you're doing it, especially if it's random, and it's purely an issue of dominance. We can do it because we can. We have the power to do it, so we're doing it. And yeah, so that was just wow. I was just curious on how Canada was effectively taking this on the ground. Has the government
Mhm.
decided what they're going to do in response?
They really only have one proposal. I mean, it's a two-track response. The one is reciprocal tariffs, retaliate, and the second is, plead and beg with the Trump administration and various sympathetic figures in the Senate and Congress and governors to persuade Trump not to do it. That's it. That's all they got. And, they have thrown out this. I've ridiculed this idea. I just can't believe the ignorance of Canadian political leaders. The two leading candidates, are of course Mark Carney, former Goldman Sachs banker, a former governor of the Bank of Canada, Bank of England, who now seems poised to win the election, even though the Liberals were about to take a terrible drubbing under Trudeau. And the other is a guy named Pierre Poilievre, who's just, I call him the yapping Zionist Chihuahua. And if you listen to him speak, you'd understand. But in any event, they're talking about, more deeply integrating Canada's economy with the European Union. How do they not
Interesting.
see that the European Union is a Titanic that it's in an iceberg and it's going down? How do they not see this? How do they not see? I mean, Carney, a
Interesting.
banker, he can't see the official economic statistics. You know, that's not a solution. A solution, if you want to rely on trade, I think the first priority should be to develop domestic industries so that we can supply ourselves with what we need for our own well-being and have control of our own destiny. There's no talk about that at all. Zero. Not even the supposed left-wing parties are talking about that. The Greens and the
Yeah.
NDP. But if we're going to have trade, you'd presumably go to the people who have the biggest economies and are showing the highest levels of growth, which is BRICS, right? There's zero discussion of that. It's not even like on the table. It's not something that's even worthy of being talked about. That's how impoverished the political discourse is in Canada.
Hmm. Interesting. Wow. I mean, I guess Canada considers themselves like a North American, European, it's like the closest thing to Europe or North America in a weird, in an odd way.
Yeah, Jamal,
Um,
the political elite of Canada is white supremacist. I mean, that's just the bottom line, right? These people
Yeah.
can't get their heads around, you know, becoming closer to the non-Western world, the global South, than they are with, you know, the European states and the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. They just can't even imagine it because there's a lot of latent white supremacy there. I think we have to be honest about that in Canada.
Mhm. Fair point. I accept that point. You get no pushback on that point. I agree with you. Look, I strongly suspect that even, you know, I used to think that an interregnum was taking place between the US and China or the US and Russia. And I realized it's not individual states. It's more so the Western world led by the US at this point, because the US is the strongest of the Western world, where they've lumped themselves in together thinking we're holding back the night being everybody else. Like it's 14% of the globe that decides that they're going to dictate terms for everybody else. And even when they talk in a sense like as if their point of view supersedes the 75% of the rest of the world. It's very bizarre in the way that they do it.
Mhm.
So I agree with you. There's no pushback on that. I agree with you. I want to get into this. So Donald Trump is with Netanyahu. Netanyahu came to the White House. I apologize for congested. That cold. Netanyahu came to the White House, and Donald Trump was just sitting there, buddy, arm in arm with him. But while they were there, Donald Trump said this, and he said this about Iran. And in order to get the context, Iran has effectively said that they weren't going to negotiate. We're not negotiating. We will do so indirectly. Now, is there a difference? Well, they think it's a face-saving mechanism to say we're doing it indirectly. So fair enough. And they would also make the argument, well, we've always engaged with the US indirectly. So this is not really a change in the status quo of things. All right. Fast forward. So Donald Trump has threatened Iran, and he doubles down while Netanyahu is sitting there with them in the White House.
We had great discussions today, I think, on the obvious subject of Iran. We're having direct talks with Iran, and they've started. It'll go on Saturday. We have a very big meeting, and we'll see what can happen. And I think everybody agrees that doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious. And the obvious is not something that I want to be involved with, or frankly, that Israel wants to be involved with if they can avoid it. So we're going to see if we can avoid it. But it's getting to be very dangerous territory. And hopefully those talks will be successful. And I think it would be in Iran's best interest if they are successful. We hope that's going to happen. A big problem that we've done, I think I'll ask Pete to maybe talk about it for a second, because a lot of people are asking the Houthis. We've been very tough and very successful militarily.
I'll stop it there. Now, most of that is outrageous. And the context of this blows me away. And for people who are making this argument like, well, Iran should just capitulate because, you know, the US is the US, that seems outrageous to me. Donald, he's sitting there with a literal war criminal that has just murdered a 14-year-old American child, by the way, and is arm in arm. Israel, who's wanted to destroy Iran for like 30 years and has tried to get the US to do it for like 30 years, implying that Iran has a bomb, something that the US acknowledges they do not. And we acknowledge they're not trying to. And Donald Trump's argument is, well, I know we're sitting here with a war criminal that has murdered, has slaughtered like 100,000 people and has invaded all of its neighbors and has a nuclear bomb, by the way. But Iran, a country that has invaded nobody, that doesn't have a nuclear weapon, they're going to get it if they don't negotiate with me. And if the negotiations don't go my way, they're going to get it anyway. That's outrageous. That's outrageous. Iran has come back and apparently is going to negotiate. And the reporting that has come out effectively says, if they go right here, I just showed a post. I don't want people to take my word for it. I want to get your take, even though it's a large windup. Right here. It seems that on Saturday in Oman, Aragachi and Vitakov, these are ministers within the Iranian government, will first begin indirect negotiations. After an hour or two, if the outcome is positive, they will proceed with direct talks. So Trump has come out and effectively said, look, Iran is going to have direct talks with us, which completely undercuts the Ayatollah's argument of no direct talks with Trump. Give me a take on this. I'm not Iranian.
Yeah.
Give me a take on this.
This is my first time I've heard that Iran's communicated that they're going to have direct talks. So I'm just going to have to assume that that's an accurate report, but you know, I need to inform myself better to decide whether or not there's something else going on here. But let's suppose it's an accurate report. You know, first of all, there is tension in the Iranian government between the Ayatollah, who I think is more hardline, than Pezeshkian, the recently elected president, who I think is more concerned about avoiding war. I don't think either of them wants a war with the United States, to be clear. But I think that he's probably, you know, willing to make more concessions than the Ayatollah is. The second thing is, you know, the Russians are strategic partners of Iran, and I think the Russians are probably telling them, you know, I understand where you're coming from, but you should sit down and at least talk to them. What is the harm in having a face-to-face discussion? If you don't like the direction, you can pull out. And let's recall that, you know, there were plenty of reports that the Russians were saying that to Bashar al-Assad in terms of his relationship with Erdogan in Turkey. And Bashar al-Assad said no repeatedly, and look what happened to Bashar al-Assad. So I suspect that the Russians are communicating a message along those lines. You know, not that they'll abandon Iran, but that, you know, don't be so hard-headed that you miss an opportunity for a peaceful resolution. So I personally don't, frankly, attach a lot of weight to whether they're direct or indirect talks, Jamarl, and I don't think that really matters at the end of the day. What matters is, what does the United States want? What does it want? And, you know, Scott Ritter, I heard you talk about Scott Ritter. We don't need to go, you know, get into that. I've had my own concerns with Scott. I've had my own exchange with him on, you know, on X about some of the things he's been saying. But he's saying, and I'm just using him as an example, there are others who are taking this line, that what they want is for Iran to end its nuclear program. Okay, so let's just stop for a moment and note that the 2025 threat assessment of the U.S. intelligence agencies says that Iran is not seeking a nuclear weapon.
Exactly.
It just came out, you know, and not only did it say that, it said that the Ayatollah suspended the nuclear weapons program 22 years ago, and they've never resiled from that position. Okay, so secondly, they have a right under international law to have a peaceful nuclear program. Thirdly, Israel has, you know, a nuclear arsenal that's capable of destroying the entirety of West Asia, if not setting the entire world on fire. And they're the only state in West Asia that is not a party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So no one's inspecting their nuclear weapons, and they're acting like absolute criminally insane lunatics who are entirely capable of using nukes. No one should doubt their capacity to do that. Okay, so we're supposed to be worried about the Iranians? Are you kidding me? So, but I want to go back to Ritter's position. Ritter's position is, you know, and others, you know, okay, well, nonetheless, it's the reality. You could end up in a bad place if you don't negotiate on this point. So you should at least sit down and think seriously about serious restrictions, if not dispensing entirely with your lawful and peaceful civil nuclear program. But, and this is a point I made to Scott on X, it's not just about the nuclear program. And in fact, if you look at the threat assessment, there's good reason to doubt that has to do with the nuclear program. What they want just as much, if not more so, Jamarl, and this was something that Trump tried to get them to do several years ago, was to give up on their ballistic conventional missiles, which is the best defense they have, as you know. And secondly, they want them to stop supporting the axis of resistance. So effectively, they want Iran to render itself completely defensive on here. And I would be shocked. I would be shocked about two things. I would be shocked if Trump is not demanding this, with Netanyahu behind him saying, you've got to get this. Anything less than that, we go to war. And I would be shocked if the Iranians would agree to it. That's the real issue. Are they willing to capitulate to avoid a war. And at the end of the day, will they ultimately avoid one? I doubt that. You give the Trump administration and Netanyahu, a hand, they'll take an arm. You give them an arm, they'll take a torso. You give them a torso, they'll take the entire body. The one thing you don't want to do at this stage, after they entered into that nuclear deal, they respected the nuclear deal. It was effective to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon, and Trump, without any justification, pulled out of it. I think that they would be ill-advised to be making major concessions at this point. What I would be saying if I were in their situation is, look, we're willing to accept some more severe restrictions on our nuclear program than we accepted under people from suffering. But more than that, if you actually want us to give up the program, we have nothing to talk about. If you want us to give up our ballistic conventional missiles, we have nothing to talk about. And if you want us to stop supporting the axis of resistance, we have nothing to talk about. That's what I think is probably going to happen, but who knows?
This is about the destruction of Iran. Period. It's not about the negotiations. The negotiations is a stalking horse for the destruction of Iran. Look, people think it's not about treaties. It's not about morality. It's not about ethics. You have an objective in mind. That objective in mind was stated very clearly by Wesley Clark. We're going to destroy all these 7 Muslim nations, with Iran being at the very end. If Iran is insane enough to give up its ballistic treaties, that is effectively, or ballistic missiles, that is effectively giving up sovereignty. And I promise you, in the same way that they went after Syria, that they're bombing Libya, that they're bombing Lebanon, and these countries have no capacity to defend themselves, Iran will be next. It doesn't matter the treaty that they may sign in this. The U.S. blows off treaties left and right. They blew off the JCPOA. They blew off the Minsk agreements. They blew off the missile agreements that they had with Russia or the Soviet Union. They blew off even NAFTA. Even NAFTA, they blew off, right? So even the ceasefire that Donald Trump negotiated, they allow Israel to violate on purpose in order to give them more weapons so they can continue their genocidal rampage. Do we honestly believe that Israel is an honest actor that would acknowledge any deal that they come up with? No. They're looking for the potential to weaken the Iranian state. That's it. Any negotiation, any deal has that purpose in mind, with the idea of going after them at a later date, just like they went after Syria for 10 years, if not longer. So I understand it's perfectly fine to engage in indirect talks. Even if you want to engage in direct talks, I agree with you. I don't see the great difference between indirect and direct. The only difference is that the Ayatollah said they will not be direct. And maybe they could be a fig leaf of, well, they're indirect in the moment, but they're direct later if they go well. Okay. Right. I take issue with this position that we are focused on Iran. When, like you point out, Israel is on a genocidal rampage with a fascist state with nuclear weapons. I just find it outrageous that this is the conversation that we're effectively having with the U.S. government that's threatening a country that is not threatening us. I find it to be amazing. Mm-hmm. Do you think Trump is bluffing? That's the other thing that people are asking. Is this a bluff? Or is he really willing to take the world for Israel? Can you hear me? Are you still there?
I don't.
There.
Yeah, I'm there. So I absolutely do not think he's bluffing, and it would be very dangerous for people to make that assumption. Donald Trump, I just did a report on my program, Reason to Resist. It was entirely focused on his first administration. And if you look at the first administration of Donald Trump, it has one big flashing word all over it in neon lights, and that word is war. That man is a warmonger. That man, he intensified the wars and prolonged the wars in Afghanistan, Syria. He, this is not the first time Trump has been torturing the Yemenis. He did that during his first administration. He, did all sorts of things for Israel, which, they legitimized Israel's violations of international law, like the theft of the Syrian Golan Heights. But I think, and he also armed Ukraine, even though Obama wouldn't do that. He pulled the U.S. out of the JCPOA. He pulled the U.S. out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. the man was an absolute warmonger. But the thing that I think is most important, Jamarl, from his first administration was that he murdered Qasem Soleimani, the top Iranian general. And anybody who was thinking logically at that moment would have understood that by murdering that man, there was a high risk that you would end up provoking a full-blown war with Iran. And the only reason why it didn't happen is because the Iranians gave the Americans notice about what military bases they were going to hit, so that no American soldiers died when they retaliated. They showed restraint. That's why there wasn't a war. But if they had not shown restraint and they have inflicted casualties upon U.S. military personnel, as was their right, because there was an act of war made against them, what would have happened? There would have been a full-blown war. So it wasn't Donald Trump who stopped that from happening. It was the Iranians who stopped that from happening. He's perfectly capable of doing it, and I think he's serious. He's absolutely serious. And I personally believe that all this crap about, ending the war in Ukraine, what he really wants is he wants to suspend the fighting temporarily for two reasons. He wants to butter up the Russians so the Russians don't help the Iranians when they get attacked. They have a strategic partnership with Iran, which talks a lot about military cooperation. But most importantly, U.S. weapon stocks are very depleted, and the U.S. can ill afford to be providing weapons simultaneously to Ukraine, to Israel, and to its own forces to attack Yemenis and particularly Iran. And then that would leave them entirely naked, of course, in the Indo-Pacific region, where they're looking forward to making war against China one day. So I think that's all this is about. Hegseth gave a speech, in Brussels in early February, where he talked about a division of labor, and he said the Europeans, he basically ordered them, you arm Ukraine. The so-called peacemaker Trump, he sent his Secretary of Defense to tell the Europeans to drastically increase their military spending and arm Ukraine so that they could focus their military assets on China. That's all this is about. It's resource allocation. What he's doing in Ukraine, it's just pure resource allocation. It has nothing to do with a lasting peace. And this is all a lead up to the Iran war. I hope desperately that I'm wrong, Jamarl, but that's what I see is going on here. And I think it's pretty obvious.
That may be fair. That's fair, right? That's a fair appraisal. If that is true, he's not going to get what he wants. Russia, look, I think the world is not as stupid as I think the United States thinks the world is. Russia is not going to give leeway in Iran and in Ukraine. Meaning, from the Russian point of view, we're winning this war. You can't do anything about it. You've thrown everything at us. You've effectively fought this war, according to the New York Times. We are going to pursue our objectives until the special military operation is finished. And what that means is, from the Russian perspective, we want to deal with the root causes of this. Period. That's the way they look at it. Anything short of that, it's not going to be accepted. And the U.S. could do nothing
I just want to say,
about it.
I'm sorry, I don't want to be misunderstood. I completely agree with you. I don't think this is going to work. I think it's going to fail miserably, and it's going to be ugly. But I'm just saying, I think that that's what's going on in Trump's head. Sorry to interrupt you. But, I'm
no, you're fine. Interrupt me. I am a habitual interrupter. I don't take it poorly, right? I guess my thing is Russia, China, Iran. There is a relationship there that I don't think that Russia and China is want to give up on. I agree with you that Russia's probably telling Iran, be pragmatic. Go ahead and talk to him. There's no harm in having a conversation. If it goes poorly, we're with you. But at least talk to him. Just like Putin, regardless of what happened, Putin knows that America has been directing this war. And yet, he's Mr. Diplomatic. If you want to have a ceasefire, I'll talk to you about that ceasefire. Now, nobody believes that Russia is going to accept the ceasefire, right? But Putin's like, we'll talk to you about it. Let's have a conversation about it. Let's, we can talk over wine and cheese and sardines or whatever. Like, they are very diplomatic in the way that they effectively deal with Trump, even though they're still relentlessly, remorselessly accomplishing their objectives as they have this diplomatic track. So I would imagine they may be telling Iran the same thing. Look, we want to avoid a war. This guy's a lunatic. At the very least, talk to him, drag it out if that's what needs to be. So I firmly agree with you an entire way through. I guess my thing is, I don't know how they avoid a war either way, because I think you're right. I think all things being equal, what Trump wants is I want your ballistic missiles. It's not about your nuclear program, because all things being equal, the JCPOA had a restraint on the nuclear program. We want your ballistics. And if you're willing to negotiate with us under threat, then we believe we may be able to get them. I think that's where this is headed, which Iran will say no, which the US then reserves the right to attack. I think that's the bubble or the knot that we're stuck in with Trump. What do you think the consequences will be if he attacks Iran? Look, I think Ritter's position on this is ludicrous. The US is going to go into unprovoked nuclear war, get all of Iran's retaliation capability, and destroy the entire state of 90 million people. I mean, even the framing of it is disgusting if you think about it. You're talking about killing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in an unprovoked war. It's astonishing. Just even making that point is pretty astonishing. But what do you think the actual consequences will be to the globe, to the region? I just find this to be utterly catastrophic.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's imagine a best case scenario. A best case scenario from the perspective of world peace and the survival of humanity, but obviously a very, very bad scenario for the Iranian people, is that Iran has to go it alone, and that Russia and China don't come to their assistance. And I'm going to come back to what I think, but let's suppose that so they're completely on their own. There's no question they've demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt when they struck the U.S. military base, for example, after the murder of Qasem Soleimani, and when they hit Israel twice last year, including its probably best protected military asset, the Nevatim Air Base, hit it over and over again. And we only know this because people filmed, something like 15 hypersonic missiles striking the base. They can penetrate the air defenses. It's just, there's no question that they can penetrate the best air defenses that the U.S. and Israel have to offer in West Asia. So they have a massive ballistic missile arsenal. They're going to cause a lot of damage, no doubt about it. They're going to kill Americans. They're going to kill Israelis. How many of these missiles they have and how many get through, I don't think anybody outside of Iran knows for sure, but they have enough to cause immense damage to Israel and to cause severe casualties to U.S. forces in the Middle East. I think the U.S. has something like 50,000 forces at least in West Asia. And, right across, if you look at Qatar, which has the largest U.S. military base in the region, it's literally like a few minutes flying time by hypersonic missile from Iran. They can obliterate that massive military facility very easily. So whether they can inflict comparable damage on, certainly they can inflict some damage on Iran, no doubt about it. But whether they can inflict comparable damage to what Iran can do really depends on the state of Iran's air defenses. I don't believe for one second that it's been demonstrated that the last Israeli attack is effectively wiped out or even seriously weakened Iran's air defenses. But even if that were true, they've had, I believe, 7 months to rebuild them with the assistance of the Russian Federation. And their strategic partnership agreement, as I mentioned, calls in many parts of it for military cooperation. So I think that they're going to be in a position to cause serious damage not only to the military bases and to Israel itself, but also to the Air Force of the United States and of Israel. They should be able to at least inflict some damage there. And the big one for the global economy, of course, is are they then going to expand the war to oil facilities in the region belonging to other countries, like Saudi Arabia, like the United Arab Emirates, like Qatar, Bahrain? If that happens, we could experience a global economic depression. If the price of oil soars enormously and the supplies are choked off for a prolonged period of time. In the worst case scenario, Jamal, China and or Russia, I don't think China or Russia are going to send their troops. That I don't think they're going to do. Maybe they'll send some naval vessels to try to deter, not to strike American vessels, but to deter attacks on the coastline or on other ports. I don't know, possibly. But I think what they're really more likely to do, in fact, I would be shocked if they don't do it, is provide technologies, weaponry, and military advice on the ground to the Iranians, who are already a formidable opponent. And if they do that, the question then becomes how is the United States going to respond? If the United States determines that the Chinese and or the Russians are helping the Iranians in ways that are causing casualties to Americans and Israelis, and preventing the U.S. from achieving its goals, how they will respond. And I don't know. It's an extraordinarily dangerous situation. There's no realistic scenario in a war with Iran that doesn't involve a catastrophic amount of suffering and great damage to the global economy, in my opinion. And it could actually spiral into a nuclear war.
Yeah, that's my concern too. Like these things are unpredictable. I mean, the First World War started, Archduke Ferdinand gets shot. And nobody was thinking that this was going to turn into a global war. It was a regional issue that just spiraled out of control at the moment that other governments gets involved with assurances saying, hey, I got your back. And in a similar way, it's like the US telling Israel, hey, I got your back. Russia and China telling Iran, hey, I got you. Okay, all of these are nuclear powers. How does that work, right? I mean, the only reason the Ukraine war didn't end up in a nuclear conflict is because Russia didn't acknowledge openly that the US was on the ground effectively directing events. But the moment that Russia would have said, hey, the US is directly involved in killing 100,000 Russians, okay, you got to do with that. You got to do something with that, right? That's a political issue. The moment that you say it and state it out loud that that's effectively what's happening, the US wouldn't have a leg to stand on, considering they've been killing 100,000 Russians. By the same token, it's not an issue of what's right and wrong. It's the issue of power. That seems to be the thing that carries the day. Now, I agree with you entirely on this. It is fascinating, thicket, that, again, another conflict that never needed to take place. Like, we had a deal. They were abiding by the deal. They abided by the deal for a year after Trump pulled out of the deal. So it's a bit rich that he's now coming back saying, if you don't have a deal, I'm going to attack you and destroy and kill a lot of people. It just really is. Dimitri, I'll give you the last word.
I'm going to say something that I've said so many times, starting to feel like a broken record, and that is, we in the West have the power to stop this madness, this criminality. We have to stop voting for the same goddamn parties over and over and over again. Americans had a choice in the last election. My personal, had several choices who would have been far better than Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, and I'll mention two of them, Jill Stein and Cornel West. I think they would have made, even, without having any experience at that level of government, they certainly would have been a vastly preferable option. And same is true in Canada. You look at the polls, and Canadians are going to vote again for one of these two parties who've dominated politics in Canada for the entire post-World War II period. In Britain, they just put that clown Keir Starmer back. They took a man who stabbed Jeremy Corbyn in the back ruthlessly, and they gave him a majority government. And look what he's doing. He's not only fomenting more, he's also basically destroying the welfare state in Britain. So, my friends, we have to stop voting for these people. We have to have the courage of our convictions and start voting for people who have not betrayed us in the past and give them a chance to govern. Only then can we fix these terrible wars.
By the way, do you think Europe is going to be stupid enough to pay the 5% that Marco Rubio is insisting they pay?
I'm sorry, I was distracted by somebody. There's a man out here. Yeah, Daxi. Sorry, could you ask me that question again, Jamarl? I've been trying to tell this.
No, you're perfectly fine. Do you think Europe is going to end up paying that 5% increase in NATO membership that Marco Rubio is effectively trying to push them to pay?
If they could, they would. I think they're that crazy. I just don't think they can. They're gonna spend a lot of money. I think Trump understands that 5% is kind of like you bid high, and you'll get a better result. Even if your bid is unrealistic, you'll get a better result. This is a classic, simple negotiating tactic. Will they end up somewhere around 3 to 4%, which would be potentially ruinous to Europe? Oh yeah, they're perfectly capable of doing that. I just don't think they can come up with that kind of money. 5% of GDP. And just to go back to my warning to voters out there, especially here in Europe, one day you're going to have to pay the piper. If they increase massively military spending with debt, they're going to come back in 5 years, 10 years, and tell you, you know what, we just have to say goodbye to our social programs because otherwise we're going to go bankrupt. Yep. And it's the working class that's going to pay for this insanity.
So true. I think it's Estonia. where they couldn't pay teachers. I think they couldn't find like 80 million or 80 billion or whatever the number is for teachers. And then they found $100 million to send to Ukraine. 100 billion is like, oh, dude, like that is so outrageous. Like it's so, it's irresponsible as a state. And yet that's what they do. Dmitri, man, I always appreciate these conversations. Thank you for joining me. Dmitri Lascaris. He's a lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. In 2020, Dimitri ran for leadership in the Canada Green Party of Canada. Dimitri, where can people find you, by the way?
On YouTube, my main gig is Reason to Resist. We put out 3 or 4 reports a week. We'll be doing a live stream today later on. And I also I'm very active on X at Dmitri Lascaris. So you can also find me there.
What time is Reason to Resist? What time does it come on?
Well, our live stream today is going to be held at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. But we do them kind of irregularly. Most of the time, we just publish pre-recorded reports about geopolitics.
Fair enough. My man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. You be safe.
You too. Take care, man.
All right. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm still congested. This cold is lingering, but it's okay. Shout out to Dmitri Lascaris. Deeply appreciate him. I appreciate anybody who wants to come on my show. It is deeply appreciated. I'm going to hit this a little bit later, but Europe, you're getting it wrong. You're getting it wrong. You're getting it wrong. You're getting it so wrong. Now, what I mean by that is Donald Trump comes out and effectively says, hey, we're putting tariffs on Europe because #reasons. Now, initially in the very beginning, the entire point was, well, they have tariffs on products that are going into Europe. So we're going to have tariffs on products coming into the US. Now, a European economy that is already reeling because it decided to have this war in Ukraine, to get rid of oil and gas from Russia, which immediately deindustrialized many of the sites in Europe, where many of those companies eventually came to the United States, or many of those countries just went belly up. The amount they're paying for energy went through the roof. And you can imagine, if you're paying that much more for energy, how do you price that into the products that you're selling? What we realized after the fact was the garden of Europe was only allowed to be a garden because it was able to get cheap energy and reliable energy from Russia. When that stopped, it was no longer a garden. It's no longer a garden. So now Trump comes along and it's like, we're putting tariffs on everything from you going forward. Now, Ursula von der Leyen, trying to be rational, and as I told my ex, that is not the position that you take with bullies. Rationality is not accepted as rationality. Rationality is accepted as weakness from bullies. And Ursula von der Leyen came out and said, this. Meaning, she knows that the European economy is trash without Russian energy. She knows that they don't have any electronic companies like Twitter, Facebook, Google, Instagram, and everything else. Those are from other places. She knows that Visa, MasterCard, all of these things are from other places, meaning main industries that are a fact of life in Western society are not based in Europe. She knows that the economies of those countries in Europe have taken a hit massively because of the Ukraine war, that the United States was like, hey, we need you to cut oil. Hey, we need you to cut this. Hey, we need you to sanction that. And all of those things effectively damage Europe. So now that Trump is like, all right, we see that you're weak. We see that we can destroy or at the very least damage your economy that much more. Ursula von der Leyen comes out and says this. Again, rational.
We stand ready to negotiate with the United States. Indeed, we have offered 0 for 0 tariffs for industrial goods, as we have successfully done with many other trading partners, because Europe is always ready for a good deal. So we keep it on the table. But we are also prepared to respond through countermeasures and defend our interests. We stand ready to negotiate with the
Now, as somebody who's dealt with a bully when they was a kid, the countermeasures should have came first. Countermeasures should have came first. Should have been aggressive, should have been angry, regardless of what the reality was. You should have postured if you needed to. Countermeasures should have came first. Whatever Trump would have said, he would have respected you more for the fact that you were willing to fight in the beginning. If you need to negotiate down from the position that you start at, fair enough. But to go into it in this kind of Obama-esque way where you give the ball to the 50-yard line is not perceived as rational. It's perceived as weakness. Take it up on the weakness. Trump comes out and says, this. It's like, oh, you're being rational? You're being rational? Okay, fair enough. Now I need to watch on your arm. Now I need to watch on your arm if you're going to be rational about it.
And we take their cars, Mercedes, Volkswagen, BMW. We take their millions of cars. They take no cars. They don't take our farm product. They don't take anything. Europe's treated us very badly. We put a big tariff on Europe. They are coming to the table. They want to talk, but there's no talk unless they pay us a lot of money on a yearly basis. Number one for present, but also for past, because they've taken a lot of our wealth away, and we're not going to allow it to happen.
Again, his take is they're weak. And her coming out saying 0 for 0 tariffs is interpreted to Trump as you're weak. You're coming to me for a deal. You're weak. I knew I could get you to come to me for a deal. Go further. What I strongly suspected that Donald Trump wanted, and I'm glad the article pointed it out. Thus, it's not entirely about the tariffs. Keep in mind, the amount of tariffs that Donald Trump is putting on other countries is not equal to the trade barriers that is up in those countries. So Europe might have had like a 10% tax on like vehicles or something like that. The 0 to 0 tariff thing was offered before Trump even came out with these tariffs, just so you know. This is the issue. It's not only tariffs, it's not monetary tariffs, Trump said. The EU authorities come up with rules and regulations that are just designed for one reason, that you cannot sell your products in those countries, and we're not going to let it happen. This is what Trump said. All right. Now, Letnick, his lunatic, ridiculous, I think, Secretary of Commerce, I believe, said as much. We can't sell our lobsters. We can't sell our big, beautiful cows. They don't let us sell our cows because they're so big and beautiful, and they have thin cows. That's what he said. He went on TV and said that. Why? They don't sell Europe. It's like 27 countries, give or take, part of the European Union. There are rules that are built into how the European Union operates. I think they call them 5 freedoms or something like that. It's vague because I haven't looked at it in a while. In that rule set, health concerns are part and built into it. It's in the BRICS, right? And I don't mean the organization. I mean, it's in the BRICS in regards to the way they organize Europe. They have a trade federation, and they have rules in regards to what is allowed in their foods versus what not. When RFK gave that speech about health secretary, and he pointed out, we have all of these chemicals in our food that are generally regarded as safe, that we have no idea if they are safe, and many of which causes either cancer or childhood illness. Okay, Europe don't have those products. They don't have those ingredients in their foods. That is stuff that they've weeded out, saying these are carcinogenic, these cause childhood illness, these cause illness by the time the people get old. We don't trust these chemicals, so we don't have them in our foods. That is what Europe's position is on the light of that stuff. That is not the American position. We're a capitalist country. We don't care about the health of our citizens. We just want to make profit. And so we put all sorts of shit in our foods that give people cancer, either at a younger age, at an older age, or inspires childhood illness. Pursuant to that, Our cows get injected with all sorts of hormones, all sorts of chemicals that Europe says we don't want in our cows because we believe that it makes people ill and die younger. Same thing with chickens. Hormones, Benadryl, chemicals, etc., because we want to have a fat chicken as fast as possible. And so we have chickens who are standing up all night, tweaking out, and so we give them Benadryl to calm them down. And sometimes they're packed so close together that they would peck to death the chicken beside them just to get a little more space. We call that good farming, good capitalistic farming. Because from our point of view, the faster you can raise that chicken, the faster you can sell that chicken. So we don't care what happens to the human being that consumes that chicken. Europe says, well, that's fucking outrageous. Why would we want that stuff in our citizens? And we want our people to live as long as possible. And considering they live 10 years longer than we do, maybe they have a point, right? What Trump wants is to break what the European Union has as a model for the health of their citizens. And they want to be able to sell those fat, cancerous cows to Europe so they can eat and also die 10 years younger. He wants to sell those fat, cancerous chickens to Europe so they can eat them and die younger. From his point of view, this is a business issue. We want to be able to sell our products into your economy. And in doing so, maybe we'll lower the tariffs. Maybe. As he said, it's not about the tariffs. It's about being able to get our products in their market, despite the fact that they have laws against selling those products in their markets. So von der Leyen being open to negotiation right off the bat showed weakness. And that weakness will be preyed upon because that's what happens in the jungle. Now, I could be wrong. I'm just going by his own comments. And I'm going by the comments of the people who are coming out here selling the tariffs idea. The reality of it is Europe is going to have to make a decision to either go into a trade war with the United States or somehow change its rules to allow things into the country that their rules say should not be in the country and under no circumstances will be to the betterment of their citizens any more than it is to the betterment of us as we eat them. That is what's happening in the context of Europe right now. China has taken a different tact. China has said, fuck off. Full stop. Fuck off. That's their position. In fact, one of the, I think it was the foreign minister, came out, gave a statement and said, if the U.S. want a war, they got a war. We're willing to fight this war to the end. Period. Mic drop, leave stage, gets in his car, go and have sex with his wife. That's where China is. China slapped 34% tariffs immediately. No thought, no conversation, immediately. Then they kept going. They put export controls on rare earth minerals as follow-up what they did with the 34% tariffs. Rare earths are used for military equipment, those type of things. Meaning 80% of the rare earth minerals come from China. They are now putting restrictions on countries that are somewhat unfriendly. They follow this up also with saying, from here on out, we will ban imports of American movies into China. China is the second largest acceptor of movies coming out of the United States. Okay, no more. Meaning, what Europe should have done, whether it was going to hurt them or not, it's what China did. They can come to a deal later, but the idea that you're trying to dominate me is more important than everything else in this conversation. The dominance is the issue. The dominance is the thing that tries to force a deal that is not in your interest, not in your country's interest. Whereas China's take is, we've done this before. We're not doing this again. Fuck off. And we will go to the mat in order to hurt you every bit as much as you're trying to hurt us. And keep in mind, China only accepts what, 2 or 3% of their economy goes to the US? They're in it until the end. Europe started off in a weak negotiating position, where Donald Trump is now looking at them as prey and is looking to break open the norms that are associated with the European Union. It is fascinating. Tale of two worlds. Tale of two worlds. Let me go to my guest. I'm joined with a good fan favorite, the man himself, Dan Kovalik. Dan Kovalik is an American human rights, labor rights lawyer and political activist. He previously taught international human rights at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law and a good friend of the show. How you doing, Dan? You doing okay, man?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you today?
I am doing good, as well as I could be. I have a bit of a cold. I've been fighting it off. I've been, braving it, still doing the show despite it. But nevertheless, I am here, and I'm happy that you are joining me.
Thank you.
I have to start on Iran, just because it's the big news. So the Supreme Leader has said he's willing to have negotiations behind the scenes. Donald Trump has turned around and said, well, these are not negotiations behind the scenes. These are direct negotiations. I suspect strongly that Donald Trump knows that the Ayatollah said it was indirect, which is the reason why he came out and said they were direct, in order to, at some level, humiliate the Ayatollah. I'm sure he's not being serious. Then the reporting came out. It's in Farsi, but right here, I don't read Farsi, but I'm going to accept the thing. This is Hossein Moseveni, I suppose, Mosevian. The translation, it seems on Saturday in Oman, Arachi and Vitkov will begin indirect negotiations, and after an hour or two, if the position is possible, they will proceed with direct talks. Now, I look at this as a fig leaf. We said we were going to have indirect negotiations, so we're having indirect negotiations that may turn direct. Give me a take on all of this. It blows me away that a country with nuclear weapons, a fascist state, an apartheid state that has an open-air ghetto, that has been committing a literal genocide based on international criminal courts that have looked at this issue, that has nukes, that has invaded all of its neighbors, that has murdered en masse, indiscriminately, killing women and children, that just killed an American child, by the way, with Netanyahu sitting at the White House arm in arm with Trump, that government in the US is looking at Iran, who hasn't invaded anybody, who hasn't attacked anybody, is saying, we have an issue with your nukes. By the way, they don't have any nukes, nor are they trying to get nukes, but we have an issue with your nukes. That's astonishing in the way that that's framed. And yet, that is the framing, that is the context to which we're stuck with the Trump administration effectively saying, we are willing to end the world's economy for this fascist thug of a leader if you don't do what we tell you to do. That's amazing. That's amazing. I find that to be utterly amazing. And one more point. Wesley Clark pointed out Iran is the last country on the list.
Right.
And here we are. Here we are. Everybody else has been destroyed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Give me a take on this.
Well, it's very concerning. Actually, just before I got on our call, I saw that a report that the defense industry is preparing for war with Iran, that they're actually speeding up the production of B-52 bombers for that purpose. So obviously, war with Iran is a real possibility. Not a certainty, but a real possibility. Netanyahu's coming to Washington may have something to do with that. They may be discussing that. So I think people need to be very concerned about it. This, as people say, judging by how poorly the U.S. has fared against the Yemenis, Yemen being one of the poorest countries in the world, that the U.S. has trouble even fighting them means, a war with Iran will not be easy. It will be very destructive. It would require massive bombing campaign against Iran. And again, that is why the U.S. is now producing all these B-52 bombers,
Mm-hmm.
which means they're getting ready to destroy cities. I mean, people need to understand this. This is a terrible thing that's being considered, and it will take a lot of blood and treasure from the United States as well. So Trump, the alleged peace candidate, I guess, isn't so peaceful, I think we're finding.
That's an understatement. I mean, my take was always Trump was amoral to the truth. He can look you in the eye and tell you it's raining and it's a bright sunny day, and he would have no compunction about it in the least. You just pop his suit, walk away, no issue. And just to back you up on this was Trump, and keep in mind, Netanyahu has wanted this 30 years.
Oh,
This
yes,
has been
yes.
this has been Israel's take. Go after Iran. Go after Iran. They're going to get a bomb. They're going to get a bomb. Go after Iran. While all the while Israel is sitting there with a nuclear arsenal, uninspected, unrestricted. Everybody knows, but nobody says. It's astonishing. This was them two at the White House, two effectively murderers.
We had great discussions today, I think, on the obvious subject of Iran. We're having direct talks with Iran, and they've started. It'll go on Saturday. We have a very big meeting, and we'll see what can happen. And I think everybody agrees that doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious. And the obvious is not something that I want to be involved with, or frankly, that Israel wants to be involved with if they can avoid it. So we're going to see if we can avoid it. But it's getting to be very dangerous territory. And hopefully those talks will be successful. And I think it would be in Iran's best interest if they are successful. We hope that's going to happen. A big problem that we've done, I think I'll ask Pete to maybe talk about it for a second, because a lot of people are asking the Houthis.
All right. So this is effectively him sitting side by side with a genocidal maniac saying, we're going to have direct talks with Iran. If those talks don't go well, we will destroy Iran. That is his argument, right? So those aren't negotiations. That's effectively a mob saying, that's a nice building you got there. Be ashamed if anything happened to it. Maybe we should have talks about it. It's like, well, I don't want to talk to you about my building. Okay. I'm just saying it's a shame if anything happens to it. And then the building blows up, right? This is like the Joe Biden thing, right? Where he's talking about Nord Stream. And it was like, well, if the Russians go in, we'll stop it. And then it blows up. And the US is like, who could have done that? How did that happen? How on earth could that have taken place? It's that. But you're talking about that in relation to a country that, by our own assessment, 2025, it's not have nukes, it's not trying to get nukes. That's amazing. I strongly suspect that what Trump wants is the ballistic missiles program that basically give up your sovereignty and any notion of being a state. Because if a state can't defend its population, then it's not a state. Give me your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, and of course, look at what's been done to Syria. Syria's been destroyed. And Syria was seen, in those 7 countries that Wesley Clark talked about, the U.S. wanting to take out. I think it was always assumed Syria would have to be taken out before Iran, and that's now happened. And within Syria, which is this ancient country, many antiquities and ancient churches have been destroyed. In Iran, that would be the fate awaiting them too. I was in Iran in 2017, and that's something that occurred to me, as I was going around. I went to the town of Isfahan, which is an ancient town.
Yeah.
It's incredible, to see these ancient ruins and ancient Zoroastrian ruins and ancient churches and ancient mosques in this ancient square. And I realized, if the U.S. attacks Iran, these things will be gone, just like they're gone in Iraq, just like they're gone in Gaza, just like many are gone in Syria, many are gone now in Lebanon. This is a demolition campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And as you say, like, what threat does Iran pose? Let's look at the facts. Israel has continued to attack Iran. They've murdered a number of nuclear scientists. They killed the chief Hamas negotiator in Iran.
I forgot about that one.
Yeah, they've targeted various sites in Iran. And Iran, engaged in 2 retaliations that were fairly benign. I'm not sure anyone died in those. And it promised a third that it never carried through. Remember that. It promised a third retaliation, and it decided not to do that. Why? Because it's actually a pretty responsible state. And both of its supreme leaders, the first one, the Ayatollah Khomeini, and now this one, Ayatollah Khamenei, both have issued fatwas, religious decrees against having nuclear weapons, against developing or having nuclear weapons, that this is actually contrary to the teachings of Islam. Okay. So what threat do they pose, really? My answer, of course, is none. They're not a threat. They will defend themselves if attacked, which they have every right to do, but they are not an offensive threat. So it's very concerning. Again, I mean, that we're on the verge of a war with this major power. Meanwhile, there were protests over the weekend, it should be said. I was at the Palestinian protest in Washington on Saturday.
Yeah.
So there were anti-war protests around the country, protesting the war in Palestine, in Gaza specifically. But the bigger protests were these hands-off protests, which is the number of people like Max Blumenthal and Co. Pinka pointed out were essentially pro-war, right? One of the things they wanted hands off from was NATO, for example. So Trump is threatening war, and you have liberals out there upset that he's not engaged in more war, which is absolutely bizarre. But that's where we're at. That's where we're at in this world.
And just to give people context, this is the Wesley Clark clip that all of us are talking about. I would imagine most of our audience have seen it, just in case people haven't.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me. And one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today. And he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Sudan is mired in its own civil war at this point. All of the other countries that he named have been attacked and destroyed. Iran is the last one on that list. Iran is the last one on the list. Let me ask you something else. This seems suicidal from the position of Israel. If Iran is attacked, does it really believe that Iran wouldn't retaliate directly against Israel, where they have no F to give at that point? Meaning our strength is gone. You're trying to destroy the integrity of our state. And so we have no reason not to destroy your state entirely.
Well, that's certainly a risk, but that's why Israel needs the U.S. to be involved. Israel would never do this on its own, right? For the reason you say, because Iran might use overwhelming force to defend itself, right? And so the idea, I think, is that Israel would get the U.S. to use overwhelming force against Iran first. It would have to be more or less a preemptive strike.
Well, real quick, even in the case of a preemptive strike, it doesn't stop Iran's retaliation capability. Meaning, I cannot foresee. Yeah, I can't foresee a situation where a country that is 3 times the size of Iraq and the U.S. is able to do one attack and it eliminates all capabilities of Iran to respond at all. I just don't see that premise. Like, maybe it's possible. I'm not a military person, right? So what the hell do I know? It just seems ludicrous to me that a country that is literally 3 times the size of Iraq is able to be taken out completely in one go. It just seems like in their mind, they would be like, Israel is the root cause of this. We are going to hit and destroy every city that we can in Israel. If we're going to go, they're not going to exist either.
Yeah, well, again, I think that's a good point, but, there, and it is true that, by the way, much of Iran's capability is underground. Okay, so they've certainly prepared for this eventuality. But let's also remember, as you pointed out, that Israel has nuclear weapons. It's not known exactly how many, because they've never declared them in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But it's thought that they have at least 100, maybe 200 nuclear warheads. And so, I mean, I think the fear is that if Israel were under threat of this sort of maximum attack by Iran, that they would use their nukes.
What does it matter?
And I think that has to be very much considered as a possibility.
Wait. What does it matter? Meaning, if the U.S. is going after Iran with the idea of decapitating this state, meaning is it existential from the standpoint of, think of Zelensky. Zelensky is a really good example. From Zelensky's point of view, he doesn't care if you start a world war. From his point of view, this war is existential for Ukraine. Nothing else matters. Everything else is subordinate to being able to effectively fight. And if Ukraine goes down, what does he care about the rest of the world? That is his point of view. Think of Syria as another really good example where they were using chemical weapons and that type of stuff. And from the standpoint of the terrorists and the jihadists who were losing in that situation, in their minds, this is existential for us, so we don't care about anything else. Everything else is subordinate to the integrity of the state. Why wouldn't Iran think differently? You are attacking us in order to destroy the integrity of the state. This is an existential war that the U.S. is waging. What does it matter if Israel uses weapons, nuclear weapons, when the U.S. is already attacking us in a way that is existential?
Well, because, I guess there's a difference between, being defeated and actually being just obliterated off the face of the earth. I mean, but you're right. I mean, Iran's calculus would be that they would attack Israel with all they had. But as I said, in response, Israel may launch nukes, which, would be something the world should be greatly afraid of,
They don't seem to be.
Yeah. And Israel, by the way, itself may be willing to sacrifice itself. People worry about the Samson option, so-called, that Israel would go down swinging, and even if it suffered existential defeat, it would take Iran and others with them. So, I mean, the prospects for everyone involved are pretty bad. And also, the U.S. has assets throughout the Middle East. Right now, Trump's sending more troops to the Middle East, which will raise the number to 300,000 troops. So they will be within probably arm's length of Iran. Iran could attack those. Militias in Iraq could attack them. Yemenis could attack them. Hezbollah could attack. this is going to get ugly for everyone very quickly. And everyone needs to realize that. And that's why this needs to be avoided at all costs. This is something the world needs to prevent.
Do you think, by any chance, any of this is a bluff?
Yes, of course. I think Trump is the master bluffer, of course. On the other hand, we know a couple things. We know there was this general that worked for Trump during his first term who said Trump was inclined to attack Iran then, and that he convinced him not to do so. Tucker Carlson also claims that he played a role in convincing Trump not to do so. But that shows that, Trump has some inclination to attack Iran. Okay, so we know that. Also, I think a lot of people thought his tariffs were a bluff, and sure enough, it seems like they weren't for the most part. So, I think the threat has to be taken as very real. And the other thing is, even if someone bluffs, the problem is sometimes people call your bluff.
Yeah.
And that's a danger in doing that, when the stakes are this high. So,
do you think war is avoidable? Is the other question.
Well, it's avoidable. Obviously, it's avoidable, and it really is up to Trump. It's up to Trump. I think Netanyahu wants this war, but it would not go alone. It's not going to do it without the United States. So in the end, it all comes down to Trump, whether he decides to do this or not. I'm certain Iran doesn't want it. We'll do what it can to make concessions. But again, let's all remember, what concessions are they going to make? There was a nuclear deal in place between the U.S. and Iran. And every, major institution looking at this said, including U.S. intelligence, said Iran was honoring the deal and was not weaponizing their nuclear program.
Right.
It was Trump that backed out of it unilaterally. Said, okay, yeah, you're following it, but we don't care. We're going to break it up anyway, this deal. Well, so where does that leave Iran? Like, what is there to negotiate? Like, Iran's position is going to be just re-sign the deal. We had a deal. Let's go back to the deal. What more negotiating has to happen here? You're going to tear up the deal we had and now make us agree to something worse? I mean, again, no self-respecting country is going to want to do that.
But see, therein lies the rub. And that's why I ask, is this inevitable? Because it's that part. You already had a deal. And so, you're dealing, A, with an untrustworthy actor. There's that. B, with a stated objective to destroy Iran, with a continuity and a track record of destroying countries leading up to Iran. Iran has to know that also, right? He is going to want more than the nuclear program. He is going to want the ballistic treaty, the ballistic missiles, and he's going to want support for regional players, Hezbollah, Yemen, etc. That's what he's going to want. That's part and parcel to the reason he threw away the deal in the first place. It wasn't about a nuclear program that doesn't exist. It's about their conventional missile capability and their ability to defend themselves against a rabid Israel in a way that none of the other countries in the region could do, and with technology that can penetrate Israel's defenses. That's what Trump wants. Now, that is an unreasonable ask, which is why I asked, is it inevitable? I guess that's what I'm stuck with.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, look, maybe the hopeful thing would be a grand bargain, which, by the way, Iran offered a grand bargain after 9/11. They told the U.S., they faxed a fax to the White House saying they were willing to negotiate everything, including support for Hezbollah, and to make a grand bargain, a grand peace deal in the Middle East. Maybe that's something that could come out of this. Maybe that type of grand bargain that could include also Palestinian rights, maybe that could come out of this. Again, that may be wishful thinking, but, that's always a possibility, which I guess means to say war is therefore not inevitable. There are many moving parts here. And when you have many moving parts, it seems to me things could be agreed to prevent this from happening. And I can only hope that that's the case.
From your mouth to God's ears. From your mouth to God's ears. I bristle at the bullying. Oh, I bristle at it like nobody's
Yeah, no,
business.
it's a terrible thing. I mean, and again, this brinksmanship is dangerous because you don't know where it'll lead. You don't put the world on a deadline. Actually, the Rolling Stones have a song about that. It was in response to the first Iraq War. They were the only band that had a song opposing the Gulf War of 1990.
Really?
Yeah. Anyway, kind of funny thing. But so I'm quoting that song. You don't put the world on a deadline. So it's dangerous. But again, I think, we have to depend on the Iranians to be the grown up in the room, to hopefully find a way out of this. I hope. It's clear they are, again, that they didn't do the third retaliation they promised. That, they seem to have pulled in their horns quite a bit, in truth, to try to avoid this. So I do hope it can be avoided. And I do think, the U.S. economy may dictate some of this too. I mean, our economic woes may pressure Trump not to go through with this, Who knows? Who knows? But I mean, again, I hate to ever believe war's inevitable. I think there's a way out of this. Again, the actor that you worry about most is Israel, who seems completely unhinged and willing to do is proven it's willing to do anything to anybody at any time. The fact they, tortured a guy who held an Academy Award in his hands not 2 weeks before, that they killed this American kid, as you say, is that they killed these emergency responders, assassinated them at close range and buried their, ambulances. They've proven they will do anything to anybody at any time, and they're the ones that need to be reined in. And it's up to Trump to do it. And all you can hope is that he's doing it, and that maybe he's telling, you can only hope that behind closed doors, he's taken Netanyahu to the woodshed. I don't know that that's happening, but again, you hope so.
You mean after he pulls his chair out for him and scoots his chair in for him
Right.
and welcomes him to the White House?
Yeah. You never know. You
Let me
never
ask you
know.
something. Do you know anything about these things, the Qatari files?
The Qatari files? Well, I know if I know what you're referring to, because I'm writing a book on Syria right now, by the way. And Qatar figures very prominent in that. What I know is there's a scandal involving Qatar giving money to aides of Netanyahu in return for them kind of promoting Qatar and saying good things about them. And we know that Qatar has been involved in joint military actions with Israel recently in the last, days in Greece. So there is a lot of close relationship between Qatar and Israel. Yeah, but this is a big scandal, if that's the one you're referring to, in Israel. People are very upset about this. And even in protests are raising this. I think there's some hashtag about this Qatar scandal. So,
oh wow, interesting.
Yeah. So it seems real. I mean, it does seem real. And again, Qatar worked hand in glove with all the Western allies in destroying Syria, including through its wholly owned subsidiary, which is Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera played a very important propaganda role in that war. And by the way, a lot of people are noting, a lot of Palestinians, and I've seen this in the last couple of days, have been noting that Al Jazeera's The one good thing they did report on is Palestine. They've been very good on that coverage, but a lot of Palestinians are noticing that they've seen a change in that coverage as
What do
of
you mean?
late. That they're covering what's happening in Gaza less, that they seem that their coverage seems to be weaker than it had been, so something is going on there between Qatar and Israel at the moment.
Interesting. I know Blinken effectively told, what is it, Qatar or Qatar? I think it's Qatar. Blinken told them effectively, hey, you need to rein in their paper. Like they are giving too much bad press to the murders and the genocide that we are effectively doing. And they still cover it. I mean, to their credit, I think for the American audience, it's a bit weird that they would cover the killings in Gaza. And then when it comes to Syria, they would have a propaganda campaign acting like the jihadists are somehow these reformers, liberators, these liberating
there's
head
a
choppers.
reason for that. There is actually a very easy explanation for that. And that is Qatar is very much linked to the Muslim Brotherhood, as is the new rulers of Syria, as is Hamas. Okay, these are all Muslim Brotherhood offshoots, right, or influenced by Muslim Brotherhood. So there is some consistency there in the different coverage there, that they are supporting Hamas as they're also supporting this HTS in Syria, which is also Muslim Brotherhood. And it should be pointed out, though it's those on the left are a little reluctant to point this out, but it should be noted that Hamas for some time was actually working to overthrow Assad. Right, they were actually participating with countries like Qatar to overthrow Assad.
They applauded.
Because of the Muslim Brotherhood connection.
Mm-hmm.
So that they would eventually stop that and apologize for that. But I mean, so this is a very complex interweaving of relationships here that aren't always as clear cut as may seem on the surface. So
one last thing before I let you go. Egypt. I saw reporting that Egypt had built up a tank army in the Sinai, like basically near the Philadelphia corridor or something to that effect. Explain that. What is going on with this? Is Egypt concerned that Israel is going to do a land grab? Is Egypt concerned that Israel is going to eject the Palestinians into this region that they effectively don't want them to be? What is going on with Egypt in this case?
Yeah,
and then I have one more question after this. I'm sorry.
I think both of the above. I mean, I think they're worried that Israel is, yes. I mean, the main concern is that somehow Israel's going to try to take over the Sinai and put the Palestinians there, and they don't want that. That's why those tanks are there, to prevent that from happening.
Would Egypt really fire a shot in anger at Israel?
I don't know if
they did
in anger, but in self-defense. Perhaps. I mean, at some point, Egypt's going to have to defend its sovereignty. That Israel's already violated the Camp David Accords from the 1970s, right? By taking over the Philadelphia corridor, by taking over the Rafah crossing, by closing the Rafah crossing. There is no peace. I mean, Egypt could interpret that to mean that the peace deal's broken and the peace deal's off. I mean, at some point, Egypt has to be Egypt, and it has to defend its sovereignty and its self-respect. That's, we'll see if they do it. But I always say if I were in Sisi's shoes, I'd realize that if I took on Israel, even if I lost, they'd build a statue 100 feet tall to me. I mean, I would be a modern-day pharaoh, right? A rock star, unlike the coward that everyone views him as. Why wouldn't you opt for that first option? I don't get it, but
so they build a statue in his honor.
Absolutely. They'll build another pyramid in his honor, for sure. Yeah.
Oh, that's too funny. Yeah, he's building up those tanks. I suppose it's threatening. I have to be honest. After watching a genocide take place for the last several years, I'd be very skeptical if he did anything, even if they did take that
Yeah.
land or invade the land. But I don't know. Who knows? One last question. I'm fascinated with what's happening in Turkey. I'm sorry, in Syria. Turkey and Israel both invaded. Turkey and Israel were both working together, regardless of Erdogan screaming, Netanyahu is Hitler. They still
Right.
were working together when they invaded Syria and they were effectively balkanizing and carving up the country. Israel has killed Turkish soldiers in a bombing raid. Turkey has started to put in air defense to prevent Israel from being able to do that in Syria, meaning they're rubbing up against each other in regards to the land that they've effectively stolen in Syria, where they've now ended up bordering one another. Could you go into this for me? I mean, like I said, you're writing a book on Syria. I'm curious if this is part of it.
Well, yeah, of course, I talk about the different countries' role in it. The main countries involved in overthrowing Assad were the United States, Israel, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. I think I've named the main players. Others, UAE was involved too, but those were the main players, But they all, while they all had the objective of overthrowing Assad, they all had their own reasons for doing what they did.
Yeah.
Which weren't always the same, right? I mean, the Saudi Arabia's reason for supporting Al Qaeda in Syria was not the same reason Israel supported 12 opposition groups there. And so, in the case of Turkey and Israel, yes, they have some things in common in Syria, but not everything in common. Erdogan sees himself as the new sultan, and that he thinks actually parts of Syria, including Aleppo, should be part of Turkey. So part of his desire is to take those parts of Syria. Israel sees other parts of Syria as theirs. So that could result in, some skirmishes between those two countries. And, who knows? Yeah, it could result in a war. I doubt it, but it certainly could result in skirmishes back and forth. Israel's killed some Egyptians too, during this genocide around the Rafah border. So, but that didn't start a war, So we'll just see. We'll just see.
Wow, it's fascinating and complex.
Yes,
Daniel, thank you for this. I always
You're very
appreciate your
welcome.
explanations. I know this stuff is dark. I know this, like, we're talking about wars, people getting killed, left and right. At some point, we'll be able to talk about something nice, hopefully. Oh, I know. Somebody asked me once before, what is your favorite Star Trek series? I know you're a big Trekkie. Favorite series. And I'll let you go
I'm
on this
old
one.
school. I'm old school. I like the original one with Bill Shatner and Leonard Nimoy, and that's what I grew up on.
William Shatner, the coolest white man on the planet.
Yeah, 90 years
Coolest
old
white
and
man.
still going. Actually, he has a good album too. A very good album. I know he did some kind of cheesy stuff, but he has a really good album that I still listen to once in a while of music. You'd be
Rocket
surprised.
Man. Oh, the
No,
Rocket Man
beyond
thing
no, it
is
was
a
after
trip to
that.
me.
Yeah, Joe
Oh, after
Jackson
Rocket Man, he made
produced
an
it.
album.
Yeah, really good stuff. I'll send it to you. I'm going to send you a link on Spotify. You will
Please
not
do.
be
And I
disappointed.
tell
I
you,
promise.
one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek. Do you remember when they had the hippies on Star Trek? They went through their hippie era, and
Oh
Spock
yeah.
was
I do. Yeah,
playing.
sure.
Oh, it is one of my favorite episodes.
It's really
Spock
good.
was
Yeah.
getting down. Yeah, it's so good. Daniel Kovalik, my man, American human rights lawyer, labor rights lawyer, and political activist. He previously taught at International Human Rights at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. Daniel, thank you for this. By the way, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at Daniel M. Kovalik, and my newest book that's out right now is The Case for Palestine, Why It Matters, Why You Should Care. Be great if people picked it up. It's gotten great reviews. You can get it on Amazon or at my publisher at skyhorsepublishing.com.
Check him out. Man is awesome. You have a good one, Daniel. Be safe,
too.
man. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Shout out to Daniel. Deeply appreciate him coming on to the show. The man is awesome. If you're interested in his book, definitely check him out. Definitely pick it up. Yeah, we're in a moment of potential war. We're in a moment of potential war. And it feels inevitable. And the reason why I say feels inevitable, because we're not dealing with honest, rational actors. We're dealing with people who want something. And from my point of view, what they want is the destruction of Iran. That is what Wesley Clark said back then. Wesley Clark, I think it's 20 years ago, consistent through multiple administrations. They have inexorably accomplished that goal, one president after the next, after the next. It has been consistent, regardless of who's been in that office. They've taken out Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Sudan is a basket case. And the last standing country is Iran. And right now, Trump has put out a death warrant for Iran, which is I would argue, a poison pill. Is Trump going to be content with the nuclear program, which I don't think he is? Or is he also going to want the ballistic missiles and everything else? Now, think of every other negotiation that he's effectively taken place. He has maximal demands in what he wants. And the rub is, if Israel is standing right behind him, rubbing him on the bottom, saying, hey, Trump, keep going. Get more. We need more. Then how is that going to influence the president of the United States, who's outwardly murdering Yemenis on Twitter, of all places, who's reveling in that blood, actually bathing in the blood of children and women as he goes about bragging about it, and is now effectively saying, if you don't negotiate with me, and if I don't like the outcome of the negotiation, I'm going to murder as many Iranians as I can possibly murder. That's what I'm going to do. I'm Donald Trump. I'm going to kill, slaughter, and murder. I'm going to use American service members who got into the military with the idea of protecting this country at the behest of a racist, fascist, apartheid state that is literally on a genocidal killing spree. That's what Donald Trump, America's first president, is going to do. For one, that's not a negotiation. That's something else. If we're talking and I can't leave the room, that's something else. And the catch is, will he do it? As I told Garland last night, I think he would. I think he would. Donald Trump has decided to have a trade war. Doesn't care about the consequences of the trade war. If you look at previous presidents, George Bush literally murdered 1 million Iraqis in an unprovoked war of aggression based on the premise of a lie that they had nukes. Trump is using the same argument, same framing, the John Bolton argument of, well, we get to dictate outcomes. We're America, they're Iran. We are not the same. And because we're not the same, might makes right. And so if we decide that we want to attack you, then we can decide to attack you. If we decide that we want to get rid of your nuclear missile program that you don't have, we can do that because we're America. This is a ludicrous premise. And not just a ludicrous premise, it's fraught with uncertainties. How do you know how Russia will respond? How do you know how China will respond? How do you know what Iran has in its arsenal? How do you know that they won't hit X or Y that will have all sorts of ramifications for not just the United States, but for the rest of the world? How do you know? How do you know? How do you know? Meaning, under normal circumstances, deterrence is the idea that I can cause you a massive amount of pain. Even if I can't beat you, I can cause so much pain that you leave me to my devices. Iran, believing that they're dealing with rational actors, believed we have deterrence. We don't need nukes. We can destroy the world's energy economy overnight if we need to. Trump is like, I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. Now, whether they had nukes or not, if you're dealing with a country that has an irrational actor and they have nukes, all bets are off. And I guess my issue with all of this is unforeseen, unpredictable consequences and the wanton murder of a large number of people in an unprovoked war of aggression, with the rest of the world just sitting around like, oh, well, I guess the US is going to attack Iran again. That's astonishing. This is the same rest of the world, by the way, that watched us back a genocide in the slaughter and massacre of hundreds of thousands of people, 2/3 of which being women and children in multiple countries. That is astonishing. And in a trade war with these countries, as opposed to telling the US, we're sick of your shit, fuck off, many of which are acquiescent. If you give a bully what they want, they're going to take more. Just going to take more. I want to go to another story. KJ is going to be on at 9:30. And KJ is going to talk about China's response to everything that is occurring in regards to what Trump is doing. Now, oh, damn it, it's behind a paywall. I want to show this article by The Economist, because I would like to put a word in your mind for the moment. Stagflation. Stagflation. Let's see if I can show it at least a little bit. Come on. But it's not letting me show it. All right. Economists are concerned about stagflation. And what they mean is effectively low growth. Here we are. Trump tariffs leave economists fixated on one word: stagflation. The idea that there's little to no growth, but prices are through the roof. Can I show any of this? They're not going to show any of it. All right, fair enough. What they're effectively saying, oh, dude, what is StreamYard is royally fucking. There we are. StreamYard is screwing up. Stagflation. So to work against the world, then you've effectively, so oil prices, for example, have plummeted. Gas prices have plummeted. Well, that's curious. Why would oil and gas prices plummet? Because many industries at that point consider industries and businesses. This also means, however, as a byproduct of that people are not going to be using as much energy production in their factories, in their industries, or for that matter, going on travel and everything else, because those people are not going to have jobs. And so the amount of oil and gas that needs to be used, so the price drops. It's an indicator of what people are thinking is taking place around the world as a result of the trade war that Donald Trump has enacted around the world. All right. On top of that, though, what that means is that wages either are going to be flat or people are just going to lose their jobs. That also means on top of that, prices are going to go up. So not only do you have the situation of depressed money coming in, but you also have high costs for things. Because again, it's a tariff war. If China is putting tariffs on everything that comes into China, you can imagine that people are going to buy less of those products. If we're doing the same thing for items coming into the United States, the price of those items are going to go up. It's not like our wages are going up, prices are going up. So you are in not only a recession, but you are also in a situation where prices are also higher. The economists are looking at this, thinking to themselves, this may be worse than a recession. This may go into something else, like stagflation. this is the worst of both worlds. Now, perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps in a month, 3 weeks, it's all settled. The only fight is taking place with China. And Trump is in negotiations with China for something that China most likely is not going to give. Who knows? I don't know. I'm not, I don't have a crystal ball on this stuff. Mark Frost could end up being perfectly right in his assessment of these things. I don't think so, but he could be, which is the reason I had him on the show, because the alternate point of view was necessary just in case there was an outcome that came out. I'm very doubtful, though. Now, part of this seems to be to not just get tariff reductions in various countries, but to get bonuses in some way of those countries where we remain dominant and we get a better position in negotiation or in relation to those countries. Now, some of those things are trade barriers where, hey, we want those trade barriers down if we want to keep doing business. In other cases, it may be, let's say, more like in the European Union, where we want to be able to sell our products into your union. We want to break your union in regards to your health benefits and everything else that's associated with how you organize your system, your political system. Will he be able to do that? Would Europe break their model to allow Trump to put in his fat cancer-causing chickens or his fat cancer-causing cows? I don't know. If they do, then he is going to ask for more because they're weak enough to do it in the first place. And by the way, this goes all around the world: Vietnam, India, et cetera, et cetera. As Dimitri points out, Canada is not really in a position to say no. Fascinating. The other story I want to hit is Rubio. And maybe it's not Rubio. I guess it's Trump. But Rubio is effectively the hand of the king on this issue. Rubio came out and said this. And whether Rubio realizes it or not, it is so detached from reality. It's so detached from reality. But this is Rubio. Let's play the clip.
Whether they want to do peace or not. And if they do, then there's a way there. And we're willing to help. Right? If all of a sudden we wake up tomorrow and the Russians are launching a massive offensive, then I think that's a pretty clear sign they're not interested in peace. That hasn't happened yet. Let's hope it doesn't happen. We want to know whether they want to do peace or not. And if they do, then there's a way.
All right. We want to know whether the Russians want to do peace or not. If they do, we can help them on the way there. And he points out, if they try to do an offensive, then that would be an indication that they don't want peace. Now, if you're looking at Western media, you're seeing two different stories. One, it's weak. Putin is scrambling for a deal. He needs a deal because the Russian military is about to collapse. It's a stalemate on the battlefield, et cetera, et cetera. In the other story, you get something like out of the Telegraph, where they say, well, Trump and Russia have effectively come to a deal. And what Trump is going to do is present Zelensky with an ultimatum that makes his knees buckle. Either accept the ultimatum, or we cut intelligence, we cut support, and you're on your own. It's one or the other. Both of these things are weird because both of these things are completely contradictory to each other. One says the Russians are weak. Putin is on the brink of death. He has cancer. His generals are nowhere nearby. He's isolated. He's terrified. And he is scrambling and pleading for a deal. In the other case, he won the war. He's working with Trump. And they are about to put the business to Zelensky. Truth of the matter is, I have no idea which one of those are true, by the way. I know this one is not true. Truth of the matter is, Russia's winning the war. Nothing you can do about it. You've done everything you could. You can't do anything about it. They're advancing on the battlefield. Nothing you can do about it. The Ukrainian military is suffering, and at some point will buckle. They will engage in negotiations with you, providing they can continue on the battlefield, which they are. And any ceasefire deal would be absurd. Putin has been very clear. Look, we're willing to engage in a ceasefire, providing You are willing to stop intelligence, stop support. European leaders are willing to stop intelligence and support. And we will be more inclined to have this conversation. Until you get to that point, we will continue pursuing our objectives on the battlefield, killing Ukrainians, shooting them in the face, and moving forward as we, step over their dead corpse. These are your options, one or the other. If you're not going to do the ceasefire that we're talking about with these conditions, then we will pursue our course. You've been dumping money, weapons, sanctions, all of these things to strategically defeat us for the last 3 years. We're not stopping. We don't care who's in the White House. We're not stopping. Now, the catch becomes, is Trump willing to do that? That's the question. There's also this issue of the Ukrainian government. You have a fascist government led by Zelensky, where he is unwilling to have elections. But there's a rumble that they may be having elections. Now, Trump hates Zelensky, wants him out. Putin says he's illegitimate, wants him out. So you have basically the two leaders of these two superpowers that want him gone in order for any deal to effectively take place. Zelensky, third in the swimming pool, doesn't necessarily want to go anywhere. And so he is making moves in the country, according to various publications, in order to have snap elections that allows him to have a better chance of being the only person in that election. Trump is looking for somebody else in Ukraine that can take over that spot, where they can run and take Zelensky's spot, who's more of a yes man to Trump. Now, let's be honest. This doesn't really solve Russia's issues. Because from Russia's point of view, if you keep a fascist architecture in place, as opposed to allowing free elections, allowing an open media that can actually argue and come to the assessment of what is in the best interest of Ukraine, then you stay and have the exact same problem as you had that initiated the special military operation in the very first place. And the fact that they had to expend that much blood and treasure, you may have to end up expending that much blood and treasure in another 20 years, where Putin may not be there. I would wager to you that Putin is looking at this as, my philosophical, ethical, legal responsibility is to defend Russia from these maniacs that are backing genocides, that have knocked it over Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, that have effectively set fire to the world, that have had kill squads in South America. So yes, the fact that these maniacs are on my doorstep, I feel some kind of way about it. We've been invaded multiple times to the tune of like 50 million Russians. So no, I'm not going to take it easy with this potential hostile military organization on my border. I need to solve this, and I need to solve this now. It is my job to solve it. And that is what he's effectively doing. Now, does Trump know that? Does he understand that? Does he even care that that's the position of Russia? I have no clue. That statement by Rubio, on some level, gets across that they don't get it. They're out to lunch. If you think that Russia is stupid enough to accept a ceasefire from you with some assurances, you're out of your fucking mind. Ukraine is violating the 30-day ceasefire that is already there. Put that in context. Trump initiated a ceasefire with Hamas and Israel, allowed Israel to violate it all the way through, up until the point of resuming a genocide. It was Israel that violated the deal. Trump said nothing about it and backed Israel as they're committing the genocide. So again, why would any rational actor listen to anything coming out of your mouth and accept it with any level of sincerity? As Russia said, we don't believe you. We don't trust you. We don't trust you. Now, they may mouth the words, oh yeah, we're good friends with Trump. Because ultimately what they want is to improve bilateral relations with the United States in a way where they're not at each other's throats of the potential of nuclear war. But from the standpoint of the battlefield and whether or not they're going to lean in to anything that the U.S. puts out, considering the U.S. is the main participant in the war, it's a non-starter. If Marco Rubio doesn't know that, he's an idiot. If Trump doesn't know that, he's an idiot. If any of the people in his administration don't, they're idiots. And it also means that nothing will be accomplished in regards to a peace deal if they don't understand that basic premise. What Russia wants is the stoppage of NATO expansion. permanently. That's what they want. If you don't give them that, they're going to take Ukraine. They're going to take Ukraine because they feel they need to take Ukraine in order to remove this potential of using a rump state as another platform to launch attacks into Russia. That's their point of view. Their point of view is not irrational. It's not maximalist. And if you think of the way the U.S. was looking at the Cuban Missile Crisis, we were willing to end the world to prevent those missiles from being activated, or for that matter, from even going into Cuba. They were already in Cuba, but whatever. We were blockading to prevent more missiles from coming into Cuba. And our position is we will end the world if it takes that in order to stop those missiles from being on our doorstep. This is the issue of our national security. We take our national security seriously, so just be aware what we're willing to do. So I'm an American. I know that history. I know that happened. I know that was our take. I know that was our point of view. So how am I going to be dishonest when a similar situation happens on their doorstep and they're taking a position saying, we are going to defend our interests? This is existential, and everything is on the table in the defense of this country. It's being honest. Now, if Trump wants to end the war, he should walk away, or at the very least, accept the terms, considering it was Russia that won the war. If Trump does not want to accept the terms, then Russia will continue killing, and in some cases dying, as they take 1 kilometer after the next, inexorably moving westward, inexorably moving towards Kiev, inexorably moving towards Odessa, inexorably moving to the Polish border, without any ability to stop them. Here's the rub. Trump is setting himself on fire under this idea of, I need a deal immediately. I need a deal immediately. Russia doesn't need a deal immediately. In fact, from their point of view, let's have talks. Let's sit down and talk about it. Let's sit down and talk about the things we agree upon. Let's sit down and talk about the things we disagree upon. Let's sit down and talk about the things that, maybe we can make that go beyond Ukraine. Let's come up with a security framework of Europe. Let's come up with a way to end this as a crisis going forward in perpetuity. Let's talk, let's talk, let's talk. In Trump's mind, all of that talking takes time. I do not have the attention span for that much talking. And you keep moving, the more that we talk. I need a deal, I need a deal. These are two different points of view. The Russian point of view is because we're winning on the battlefield. Every syllable that comes out of my mouth is another dead Ukrainian and another kilometer or millimeter forward. What do you do? Now, you could say we're going to give them what they want. And in the context of giving them what they want, in the conflict. Now, Dmitri made the point that they want to end one conflict in order to pivot into another. That may indeed be true. But the fact that you ran on this notion, I'm going to end the conflict, then you have a mandate, end the conflict. Again, Trump is amoral to the truth. So this ultimately may not matter. It's a fascinating dynamic that is taking place. Witkoff has been his point man for all of this, which again is fascinating. In fact, Witkoff is the one that is going to Iran. So Witkoff has been in negotiations with Gaza and Russia and now in Iran. That's amazing. I'm going to show you a clip. And I'm going to ask you at the end of this clip, who put it out?
And stop.
Who put it out? This was Ronald Reagan on tariffs. This is fascinating.
You see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. What eventually occurs is, first, homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and stop making the innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then, while all this is going on, something even worse occurs. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition. So soon, because of the prices made artificially high by tariffs that subsidize inefficiency and poor management, people stop buying. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs. The memory of all this occurring back in the 30s made me determined when I came to Washington to spare the American people the protectionist legislation that destroys prosperity. Now, it hasn't always been easy. There are those in the Congress, just as there were back in the 30s, who want to go for the quick political advantage, who risk America's prosperity for the sake of a short-term appeal to some special interest group.
The Gipper. Guess who put that out? The Chinese government. The Chinese government. The communist Chinese government put that clip out of Ronald Reagan talking about tariffs. I have no words. I can't imagine the day that the Chinese government will put out a clip of Ronald Reagan giving a lecture on tariffs and talking about what happened in the 30s as a correlation to what was going on when he was in office and why he was not going to impose tariffs. The Chinese government put out a clip of super capitalist Ronald Reagan in order to push back against Donald Trump, the ghost of Christmas past. That is fascinating. That is, man, like, if you told me 20 years ago, one day, the Chinese government, the communist Chinese government, is going to put out a clip of Ronald Reagan to make a point, I would say you're out of your mind. There it is. There it is. Let's go to the chat. Mr. Ripley, has anyone mentioned yet the video from 1996 of Nancy Pelosi pushing for reciprocal tariffs against China? I'm sure there's a rational explanation. Look, I don't take issue with tariffs. I don't. And even when I've said this in the past, I've been very clear that if you specifically target tariffs for specific reasons, meaning I have an objective in mind that I want to accomplish with this particular tariff, okay, there may be a rational reason and there may be a rational amount of that tariff that makes sense for some level of protection for some American business that you're trying to grow in your home country. This is not that, Mr. Ripley. He is putting tariffs on the entire world under the understanding that it is going to drop markets all across the world, that the US will pay for it, meaning us will pay for it. And they are untethered to any notion of reality in regards to what those countries have tariffs in regards to their own industries. These things are different. If Nancy Pelosi is saying she wants to put tariffs on China, she may be talking about a very specific reason why she wants to do so, probably because she doesn't believe we can compete. And we do have tariffs on like their cars and those type of things in order to protect our own industries. That's not really the issue. The issue is that it is indiscriminate across the board. No scientific or economic calculus involved at all. And he's just not caring about the impact on America. That's the issue. I understand that some of you believe that this is protecting jobs. How is it protecting jobs when people are being laid off? Tell me that. This argument that Donald Trump is, we have a $20 trillion of investment. Okay, I don't believe you because you're a flagrant liar. And so, A, there's no rationale for me to believe that. B, you acknowledge that this is going to hurt the American public. And let's be honest, the fact that markets are effectively selling off all across the world, including here in the United States, where day after day after day, we've had a sustained sell-off and Donald Trump hasn't cared one iota. This is not good. Companies will start laying off, especially when they see a recession is the most likely outcome or stagflation being the most likely outcome. If you have a targeted, smart, intelligent way of doing it, God bless. This is not that. And no, it doesn't protect workers. How on earth is Trump protecting workers when he's going after unions, or he's destroying the social safety net that all of us need, including workers who pay into that social safety net, destroying the Department of Education that is intimately involved in sending kids to school. And we're in a global economy. It's not like he's investing in education or investing in Americans as they grow up and go into the workforce, investing in the various industries that he wants to grow into the United States. I'm saying this is not, regardless of what Trump says it is not a protection for workers. It's not. I'm sorry. It's just not. I don't see it. Foment dissident. It seems like race supremacy, sexism, etc., or even capitalism are ultimately a means for resource hoarding and hegemony. I mean, but that is the point, right? I mean, am I crazy? Like, there is a pressing question about humanity. Who does the labor? Who does the labor? We are all vulnerable, meaning left to our own devices. How do we get our needs met? How do we ensure that we have food to eat, water to drink, air that's clean to breathe, clothes to put on our back, things or products or, let's say, resources to get a house or somewhere to live? All of these things are questions that we need to answer in some particular way. Many people work, etc. Fair enough. But it's still a pressing question for groups and for people. And that survival instinct often kicks in where we say, hey, that guy's Black, that guy's in my political party, that person is of my particular sex, that person, etc. And we lump ourselves into various groups that we believe allow us to accomplish whatever particular objective that is, often in the sense of how do we accrue and protect resources? How do we hoard these things? Yeah, some people are racist, fair enough. But I think a lot of the stuff boils down to the issue of survival. How do we get the things that we need in order to pursue our objectives in this life when all of us are ultimately vulnerable? It's one thing to come up with a business and a job where you're able to get enough resources to ensure your own security. Somewhere along the way, it wasn't just about how do we get enough so I can eat, feed my family, feed my kids, take my kids to school, take my kids to college. It became a status symbol. So it wasn't like I have all of this money that I'm using for something. I have all of this money. Look how awesome I am because I have all of this money. It's very weird. It's very strange that that's the way it effectively became. What initially was an issue of survival initially became an issue of status, which means, by definition, that if you got it, somebody else doesn't. I agree with you. Hegemony may be part of it. Resource hoarding may be part of it. I think at the root, it goes to this notion of survival. We have fought so long, 100,000, 200,000, however long humanity has been on this planet, with an ingrained understanding of what it means to be deprived of things that we need to survive, or at the very least, have a vision of what it means to not have the things that we need to survive. And so we're willing to fight, bite, kick, scratch, do any and everything in our power. And what we found was lumping in with other people who are similar to us is a way of trying to get those things and have a better chance of getting those things. Armies, countries, or in the case that you're pointing out, races. I am somehow better. I'm somehow superior. I am somehow this or that, et cetera, et cetera. Inca, new member, welcome to the show. Welcome to the family, Inca. Welcome to the family. And for some reason, I'm showing two of these. I don't know why. Welcome to the family. Thank you, Inca. You are deeply appreciated. In fact, all of you are appreciated, even if you just like the video. It's deeply appreciated. You can support this content, PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat. What else? CashApp. A like of the video, a share of the video. All of these things are deeply appreciated and helps the show get moving. By the way, before KJ comes on, he's coming on in a couple of minutes. if my mom and I have been trying to think of a way of what to do for 50,000 celebration. And I got to be honest, I don't know. My main thought is a marathon show, and to have the show go for 6 hours, almost like a telethon, where we bring on good friends of the show that have been with the show from the very beginning, and to effectively go for every 20 minutes or 30 minutes, guests after guests after guests after guests after guests. There's a problem with that. It burns the guests, meaning I try not to bring the guests on more than once. I may bring on Mark twice if something is going on that I think Mark needs to give some kind of credibility or explanation of. But I try not to burn the guests. And so the moment that you bring that many people on, then it becomes, okay, how do you use those people and where are you going to get additional guests from for the rest of the week? Those guests may be willing to come on twice. Then it's like, okay, well, what do you talk about if you're doing a show for 6 hours like that? Do you have that many topics that you really want to talk about? That meaning it's fraught with practical difficulties in that sense. I don't know what to do. If you guys have suggestions, please give me suggestions. Please give me suggestions. I literally, honestly don't know what to do with the 50K as a celebration, but definitely put them in the comments. You can put it in the chat here. Have you paying attention to it? I want to see it. I don't know. I'm open book on this. I'm an open book on this. So if you have ideas, let me know. I also want to give a shout out to the chat. Faye Lou, ALM, DS Tanks. DS Tanks is coming from Rumble, which is fantastic. I've been trying to grow my show on Rumble also because for the most part, I really didn't have a presence on Rumble. I've only recently really been putting videos over there to try to increase it. So thank you, DS Tanks. I think it's Faye Lou. Adrian Dittman, shout out to you. What is it? Spider Hand, shout out to you. Manny Rojas, Francis Rebellious. That's the first person. That's the first time I've seen you there. Thank you for coming. David Sai, shout out to you. Very articulate. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I try. Rumplesense, Diane Thomas, Mama Thomas, shout out to you. Jinho Choi, shout out to all of you. Thank you all for being here. You are deeply appreciated. Oh, one last thing before KJ comes on. This, if you remember, Donald Trump at one point said, as he's sitting there, I'm going to cut the military budget in half. And I'm going to offer the same thing for Russia and China to do the same. Now, Russia, being political, as typical, hey, that's not a bad idea. And I would imagine they went behind the scenes and says, that guy's lost his fucking mind. You've been waging a war against us for the last 3 years, and you think we're going to cut our military budget? All right. But the same Donald Trump came out and then said this right here. I'm going to, okay, I'm coming to you in 1 second, right here.
We have great things happening with our military. We also essentially approved a budget, which is in the facility, you'll like to hear this, of $1 trillion, $1 trillion. And nobody's seen anything like it. We have to build our military, and we're very cost conscious, but the military is something that we have to build, and we have to be strong because you got a lot of bad forces out there now. So we're going to be approving a budget, and I'm proud to say, actually, the biggest one we've ever done for the military.
Just to be clear, we are the bad force. We are the darkness. We are the shadow that roams in the night. It's us. It's us. If there's a vampire that is lurking across the world, the curse upon the planet, it's us. Tell me I'm wrong. Pushing the war in Ukraine, how many people died in that? Overthrowing Syria, how many people died in that? Destroying Libya, how many people died in that? Fuck's sake, they were selling black slaves. How many people died in Iraq? How many people died in Afghanistan? How many people died in the kill squads that we're paying in South America? For God's sake, are you honestly looking at this and saying to me, there are really bad people out there? Every confession or every accusation is a confession. I want to bring in my man, KJ. KJ, no, you are the man that I've been itching to talk to all day. How you doing, KJ? You doing okay?
I'm doing well. Good to be with you.
Oh man, it's great to be with you. KJ, no, he's a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia Pacific region, contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is now available at iacenter.org. I was trying to get through that without breaking. KJ, where can people find you, by the way? I want to get this out before we start.
They can find me on the China Report, on YouTube, on the Breakthrough News Network.
Thank you for that. Eugene Perrier is on that network, right?
Yes, he is.
Yeah, I used to work with him. Very bright guy. Very, very bright.
Yeah.
KJ, China is not effing around. China's not effing around. That's how I'm going to start it. Trump came out with like a 54% tariff on China. China's response was a 34% tariff on the US. Trump then threatened, I will increase it by 50% if China doesn't take its 34% off. Not only did China not take its 34% off, China came out and says, hey, you know those chips that you guys need for your military? Yeah, maybe we don't give those to unfriendly countries because, hashtag reasons. Hey, the movie industry, where we take in like the second amount of movies coming out of the US? Hey, maybe we don't take those either. Like, China has also come out and forcefully pointed out, we are willing to fight this to the bitter end, meaning we're not acquiescing, we're not bending the knee, we're not backing down. That's not taking place. If a trade war is what you want, then damn it, a trade war you're going to get. Give me your take on this. Am I getting any of this wrong, by the way?
Oh, you're absolutely right. China is signaling that it is not going to be bullied. And they have said literally that they will fight to the end, that the US is committing error upon error, and that they don't accept the extortionate tariffs, which are typical of unilateral bullying. They're not going to take it. So they're willing to go to the mat. And it's already been signaled that their countermeasures could involve further tariffs or perhaps bans on US agriculture. They could also ban chickens, again, agriculture, farm products. They are going to suspend US cooperation with fentanyl-related issues. I mean, they were doing everything humanly possible, and they were still getting slammed for something that they had no responsibility for. So I can very easily see themselves, pulling out of any cooperation regarding that. And then countermeasures in services. So services being, the US has financial services, insurance services, the huge companies that are making windfall profits in China. All of this was actually removed from the, that calculation, because they only calculated the trade imbalances in good, not the trade imbalances in services. And as you pointed out, they're going to ban Hollywood. And they're also going to investigate the IP benefits of US companies operating in China. And so they're coming out hard. They're not going to be pushed to the wall. They're not going to back down. And I think they've figured out something about Trump, which is that if they submit or if they make nice, Trump will come out simply harder against. I think that is their calculation. And the other calculation that they're making is that they can take this. I mean, if these tariffs, hit their max, it will shave a tiny percentage point off China's total GDP. People don't understand how big China's total GDP is. Currently, the total amount of trade with the United States is about 3% of GDP. But if the tariffs are implemented and we see the effects, then it'll affect it will reduce China's total GDP by 0.5%. These are the estimates. Maximum 2.5, somewhere in that range. But remember, the city of Shanghai or Shenzhen, they contribute more to China's GDP than the entire United States. And so this just shows you the strength and the scale, the size of China's economy. And I don't think that it's going to have much effect on China. Simply the other countries, China will simply trade with other countries. It has already diversified into other countries. There's no sector or field in which the United States is China's main trading partner. China has diversified everything away from the United States, and it's only doing what is essentially, a token amount of trade with the United States. They will remove that. But on the other side, the United States still needs China. Everything that is manufactured, commercial in the stores, most of it is from China. And even if it is not directly from China, it comes from China by way of third parties. So everything will be affected. And the person who will, the people who will be the most deeply hurt by this is the American consumer, the American working class, who are essentially being forced to pay a regressive consumer tax in order to offset what are clearly going to be corporate tax cuts and personal tax cuts for the wealthy.
I try to explain it to my audience. There's some people in this audience that believes that Donald Trump is working for them and that tariffs are somehow a benefit to them. And as I try to point out to them, we are going to pay the higher cost while Trump is going to fashion a tax cut for the top 1%. So we're talking about effectively a wealth transfer from the middle class and the poor to the rich, using the tariffs as a vehicle through which to do it. And as you pointed out, China really only gets 2%. I mean, why don't they just say right off could they get their, let's say, products from Brazil or from one of the other countries, as opposed to getting it from the United States? From my understanding, they get agricultural products. So our farmers, for example, depend upon China to sell their products to. And there's no, this makes sense. China is a country of 1.3, 1.4 billion people. And you can imagine that if you're selling soybeans, for example, you would want to be able to sell it into a country of 1.4 billion people, as opposed to a country of only 320 million, which is the United States. Why don't they get those products from, say, somewhere like Brazil or from somewhere else that is part of either BRICS or something like that? Do they need to get those products from the US?
They don't. The key inputs that China gets are intermediate or raw materials. It doesn't get a lot of finished products. The only thing that it would really want from the United States are chips, and the US has completely banned those in the Biden administration. So they import soybeans, LNG, crude oil, cars, semiconductors, jet engines, semiconductor manufacturing equipment, vaccines and blood plasma, medicines, and ethylene polymers. And if you look at the actual numbers on that, they're minuscule. They're really, really minuscule of the total amount that they import. And it imports the vast majority of these products from other countries, except perhaps vaccines and blood plasma and certain medicines. So China is not going to hurt. It's simply going to get its stuff from other countries that the US is already sanctioning, and they will be happy to do trade with China. In other words, Trump has simply pushed trade or accelerate trade between China and other countries, which is what China was doing anyway. A tariff functions a little bit like a wall. It's a wall, and if you impose it on a single country, then you've in-walled it or enclosed it from exporting to you. But if you do that to the entire world, then you've simply enclosed yourself. You've simply built a wall around yourself. And other countries are going to go their merry way, trading with each other. And in the meantime, the US simply has taxed itself and made everything more expensive for itself. So Very, very bad move. Very, very foolish move. Everybody's scratching their head. Who dreamed this up? And if I were to take a stab at it, I would say that it's probably some, lowly intern, who was essentially cheating on their homework. They were told to come up with some numbers, and they ran it through Chat GTP and then just drummed something up. And now everybody's stuck with it, and they don't want to back down on how utterly and totally senseless and stupid this is.
Yeah, the penguins are enraged over this. Considering he even sanctioned a penguin island, right? Like
Right.
it comes across so ridiculous.
There are no humans on that island, and they do not export anything to us, not even snow, and still this island is being sanctioned. That tells you how much effort went into this program.
I saw Xi Jinping making this comment, something to the effect of, "Hey, we're open for business. If the U.S. wants to do this, we're open for business. Come to China. Come to us. We're willing to make this deal." I'm curious on something else. From the standpoint of, has BRICS as a collective discussed a response?
I'm
not
sure
if you
they
know.
are. I'm sure they are discussing. If China is discussing with Japan and Korea, certainly BRICS would already be in the throes of discussion. But I think that whatever discussion is going on is being kept quiet for now, because I think they're waiting to see what happens. But again, coming back to imports, the U.S. imports, the U.S. or China exports to your smartphones, computers, commodities, batteries, vehicle parts, toys, lighting and fittings, furniture, plastic articles, game consoles, etc. Okay, all of those things that the U.S. imports from China are now going to go up 100%, because remember, it's 54% plus another, another 50%. That's 104% that we're going to pay. Your iPhone is now going to cost, double what it cost a while back.
Wow. So if I buy a video game console, it's not $300, $600 now. Or if I buy a controller, it's now what, $30, $50, $60. God, man, that is going to be brutal. One other question on this: what does Trump want? Like, meaning, I get this. He obviously wants bilateral deals with various countries, with the idea of being in a dominant position in those deals, especially countries that are coming to him, like Europe, where they're like, "Please make a deal with us," and Trump is like, "I need your firstborn." It's like, this is not about tariffs now. This is about your firstborn. If at some point China and Trump meet in regards to some kind of bilateral relations, what do you think he actually wants from China?
Well, first, it seems like they're highly unlikely to meet, because Trump has threatened that all meetings with China, planned or otherwise, are canceled until China removes its tariffs. So, clearly he too is, not thinking straight. But I think that Trump, as I've said before, is at heart a neo-mercantilist, a protectionist. He believes that, high tariffs are a way of nurturing and protecting the economy, and that you should, build up, a balance of, you increase your current account balance through advantageous trade. The problem with that is that he also wants to keep the U.S. Dollar as the global reserve currency, and he said that he would impose 100% tariffs on any country that tried to de-dollarize. Well, what he's just done is he's accelerated de-dollarization, and the Chinese have just come out with a digital RMB, a CBDC backed digital RMB, which will essentially, undermine the dollar and certainly the SWIFT system in in very, very powerful ways. That all of that is accelerating. But Trump wants to maintain the US dollar as a global reserve currency, but that does not jibe with his desire to keep the current account balance zero, that he doesn't want any country to have a trade surplus. Because in order for the dollar to be the reserve currency, you actually have to have more dollars circulating than you
Exactly.
are trading with a single country. This is, the Triffin dilemma. He doesn't want that. So what does he want? I mean, this is like, this is the thing that's driving people crazy. It's like in that relationship where you just can't figure out what the other person wants because they're making completely incompatible demands. So, I mean, the worst scenario is that this is just, bullying and egotism, and that it could result in war. Certainly, the isolationism is a preparation for war. Massive tariffs like this, as we saw in the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, were the precursor to World War II. So is this all preparation for war? Is it all madness? Where is the method in this madness? I think people are still trying to figure that one out. Of course, people say, well, over a century ago, the US had high tariffs that paid for everything. Nobody had to pay taxes. Wasn't that great? That was a different era. You can't turn back that clock. You're certainly not going to reindustrialize that way, and you certainly cannot turn back the clock on progress. When you buy a car, that car has 30,000 components that were all made somewhere in outside of the United States. That's the global supply chain. You can't turn back that clock, and it's very, very foolish to think that you can. I mean, Trump is a real estate magnate. He was, his family were slumlords. Of course, there's no supply chain involved in being a slumlord or owning land or owning already built buildings. But anything else that requires manufacturing actually requires a long, complex supply chain. And perhaps that's the ignorance of Trump as well.
See, okay, fair enough. He scuttled negotiations until China removes the tariffs, which means that this is probably going to go on for a while, if that's the case. But let's say for the moment he did. And let's say when he put the 54% tariffs on China, his expectation was some kind of negotiation with Xi Jinping over the tariffs. Now, the problem with that is you're going into it with this idea of he's negotiating with me because I put a 54% tariff, meaning I have an advantage in this negotiation. At least that's the mindset of a bully, of a thug. The fact that China says, F off, we're not accepting that, so we're putting tariffs back on you. In his mind, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing that. Despite the fact that he's the one that initiated the trade war. Meaning, if you want to negotiate, you negotiate. You don't have to do it this way. It's nonsense. But he clearly wants something. Meaning, otherwise, you don't put tariffs on like that unless you're trying to get something out of the countries that you're putting the tariffs on. And so for the EU, he wants to be able to force his fat, cancer-causing chickens and cows into the European Union's economy, which they don't necessarily allow. So right off the bat, Europe has acquiesced in regard to saying, okay, Trump, we'll do 0 for 0. And Trump is like, that's not enough. Meaning he wants something from Europe. There's something specific that he wants. Same thing with Vietnam, same thing with Japan, same thing with these other countries. He wants some kind of deal where America makes out better. China's more complicated in this because it's obvious that the US is angling towards China in some way. And not just angling towards them in some way. Hegseth leak makes it clear that they're trying to pivot to China with this notion of a potential war. But assuming for the moment, it's not at the level of war where he negotiates with Xi Jinping. What does he want? I mean, I don't think China would accept any premise where they hobble their own industries, where they produce less. I think I heard somebody said, we want them to accept more and produce less. China's not going to accept that, right?
No, they're not. They're not going to. I mean, I think what Trump wants is submission. What J.D. Vance said, he said that the U.S. is at the top of the economic pyramid. It's the apex predator, and it simply receives tribute from the rest of the world through unequal exchange. They didn't use those words, but essentially that's what he was pointing out, that we design and other countries manufacture low-income goods for us, and we are at the top of the value production chain. And he wants, I'm sure they would like to go back to that arrangement, essentially where the U.S. is the plantation master and everybody is a tenant farmer on that plantation. That is the global system as it is largely structured for most of the world, except for countries like China, which are breaking out of that. So they want that global economic hegemony. Those days are gone. They're not coming back. I think they want China to submit. If you look at the early trade war in the first Trump administration, they made two sets of demands. One is they wanted China to buy much more U.S. goods, which China did, but not enough for them. But it was a two-part. It was a 1-2 punch. The second part was they wanted China to dismantle its state-owned enterprises, okay, because they said that that was an unfair advantage. Well, here's the contradiction there. First, China's state-owned enterprises are about 70% of its GDP. The largest corporations on the planet are Chinese, and they're Chinese corporations that are things like Sinopec, China State something, China State Grid, etc. China is this is what people don't understand. It's socialist because the vast majority of its wealth is held by its people. The largest bank in the world is Chinese. That's ICBC, so etc. So the Chinese have tremendous large corporations that are state-owned. The U.S. believes that these create an unfair advantage for China, and it wants to sell them off. And I'm sure that they would like to see what happened with the Soviet Union, where all these things are sold off at fire sale prices, and the U.S. gets to sweep in and buy all of it up. I think that would be the dream. It's not going to happen. China said explicitly, we are not going to change our system for you. This is one of the demands, the 5 no's of the Bali agreements. We are not going to change that. You do not get to, no war, no trade war, no war, no Cold War, no block forming, no kneecapping of our development, no regime change. These are the demands that the Chinese have made to the U.S. They expect the U.S. to uphold that. And short of that, aggressive U.S. movements that undermine that will be seen by China as hostile. The person behind this, we think, is probably Peter Navarro, who was in the original Trump administration. He was one of a straight flush of China hawks. That was LMNOP. That's Lighthizer, Mnuchin, Navarro, O'Brien, Pompeo, Pence, Pottinger, and Ross. They had a whole straight flush of China hawks. Peter Navarro has come back. He's been recycled, as have a few others. And he's the one who is just so deeply stuck on the idea that China has poisoned and stolen its way to the top, that China's success has been our loss. And he believes that you have to impose tariffs and wage, complete and total economic war, in order for the U.S. to recover its greatness. He claimed that the Shanghai Disneyland was doing better than Disneyland in Florida, where he grew up, or maybe it's in Anaheim in California, right? Anyway, so he's really upset about that China's Shanghai Disneyland is bigger and more successful than the one that he used to go as a child. So, so he wants to destroy the global economy. These people, they want to dynamite the global economy because of Disneyland.
It's like, if we can't be at the top, then we don't, I'm taking my ball and go home. I'm curious on something else. China has a relationship with Iran. They're close, actually. The amount of oil produced and everything else that China gets from Iran, I would imagine they're both part of BRICS in association with Russia. With the pressure that Trump is now putting on Iran with the notion of attacking Iran, would China get involved in any sort of way?
I doubt that China is going to get involved in a war. I think they don't have a mutual defense treaty. The only country that China has a mutual defense treaty with is North Korea. Just only one. China does not even have a mutual defense treaty with Russia. But it will trade normally, and that trade will be very, very essential. And the same thing with Iran. I'm sure it will give moral support. It will support it at the UN. It will denounce any attacks and hostilities, and it will continue to trade. So it will essentially be a critical lifeline for Iran. But we know that, the US is the empire of chaos. It's going from war to war to war. I think the concerns about war with Iran are not overblown. I think that, the Israelis are really trying to see if they can pull this one off. They want Iran knocked out. They feel like they have a good, pliant, ally in the Trump administration. And so I think that this could really happen. I mean, this has been a multi-decade project. Remember, when the US originally went into Iraq, the neocons were saying, little boys go to Iran, real men go to Iran, right? Little men go to Iraq, real men go to Iran. They wanted a war even back then. It was on the list of countries to knock out. So I think that we cannot overstate that danger. And of course, that too would be catastrophic, because Iran is not going to be a pushover. It's much, much larger than Iraq, where the US lost to, sandal wearing, sheep herders who were wearing, male dresses. It's not going to go well.
I will tell you a story that John Kiriakou told me that was shocking. Is not really the word for it, but just astonishing. John was called into a meeting where they were talking about the war in Iraq. They were planning. And John was taking notes for one of his principals that was there in the CIA. And Dick Cheney comes on the view screen. And Dick Cheney is talking. And at some point, Dick Cheney says something to the effect of, we'll be in Iran in 20 weeks. No, he's talking about invading Iraq and literally cutting a path of blood through the Middle East to get to Iran, to attack Iran. John's guy cut his mic off, turned to John and says, did he just say we're going to be hitting Iran? And John says, yeah, he did. And the man cut his mic back on and just sit there and continue the meeting. This is what these lunatics were out there thinking, and so fanciful as to believe that they were going to knock down Iraq in like a week and then just move through the Middle East unimpeded, killing anybody who gets in their way until they get to Iran. Just amazing. So I think you're perfectly right.
Jamal, I'm sorry to be repetitive, but I've said this is the grizzly bear fallacy, right? 6% of American adults, sentient American adults, believe that they can beat a grizzly bear with their bare hands in hand-to-hand combat. It's 7% among male. 8% of men believe that they can defeat a lion, This is the grizzly bear crew that we're talking about.
This will be catastrophic. This would be utterly catastrophic. The reason I asked if China would get involved is because I would imagine Iran is a strategic partner of China, every bit as much as it's a strategic partner of Russia. And what happens if Iran either changes governments because they've been fundamentally destroyed, or they fall into chaos in the way of Syria or Libya? What happens to China? And is China damaged in that relationship if indeed that happens to Iran? That's the reason why I asked the question. It seems that China has a vested interest in Iran maintaining itself in the way it is and not turning into this basket case of fire and fuckery that Libya turned into. I mean, I agree with you. China probably is not going to get involved. They don't want to be in a war, right? Nor do they want to be in a nuclear standoff with the U.S. or any other country. They want to, pursue their course. They don't want to get involved in that nonsense. At the same token, it feels like this chaos is dragging other countries into the chaos because of the vested relationships that those countries have with the countries that the United States is attacking. Russia just lost Syria. Syria was a close ally. And then even with the Soviet Union, you're talking about a relationship of like 50, 60 years and up in smoke. And now you have another friend of Russia, and in this matter, China, being targeted with that same level of chaos and destruction, unprovoked, by the way. It's amazing to me. Like, I guess my question boils down to how long do countries stand aside and watch this much fire and chaos take over the globe? Whether it is the Middle East, whether it is genocide that's taking place in Gaza, where the world has just stood aside and watched. Yeah, they get condemnation, but so what? Condemnation doesn't really matter. Like, is there anything that would get China involved short of Taiwan? And if the answer is no, fair enough. I'm just asking the question.
Well, I mean, let's think about Russia. China was not involved in the US-Ukraine-Russia war. It was pretty much hands-off. It offered its good offices to help negotiate a peace. In fact, it was the first out of the starting block, offering to mediate a peace treaty, which, I believe that offer is still on the table. I believe if the US goes to war with Iran, China will do the same thing. It will offer its good offices on behalf of Iran to mediate a peace. I believe that's what it will do, but it doesn't want to get drawn into wars, certainly not a huge conflagration. And, the other thing is Iran can take care of itself. That's my belief. Just as the Houthis can take care of themselves. The US does not have the power projection capacity that it thinks it has, unless it goes nuclear. That's a completely different story. And, there's a lot of talk in Washington, in the ruling elite class, of seamlessly merging tactical nuclear weapons into conventional war doctrine. That's a completely different discussion. But under ordinary conventional conditions, the US cannot win a war against Iran, just like it cannot win against a war against in Iraq, that it cannot win a war against Russia, a gas station masquerading as a country, that it cannot even, stop the Houthis, right? So clearly there is some massive grizzly bear fallacy thinking going on in the ruling elite. But, this is the empire of chaos and the empire of lies. It lies to itself. It is high on its own supply. It lies to others. And of course, the system, the capitalist system, always uses war as the reset button. When the system breaks down, when the system slows down, when the system is not functioning, that reboot, that hard reset button is war. As I said before, it's like your obese uncle, who cannot control their appetite, and they are starting to have, a massive heart attack. Now, the QE, quantitative easing, that's the aspirin. The aspirin is not going to work anymore. So they need to use the wall defibrillator. The wall defibrillator for capitalism is war. You wipe clean the slate, you start it all up again, you reboot, you restart the industrial you start the system up again through violent means. And so that is the thing that I'm afraid of. As for China, it is not going to step out of its balance. It's like I'm thinking of, there's some really, really good defensive boxers. They have this incredible defensive guard, and they will not be pulled off their balance, and they will not be pulled out of their rhythm. They'll stay inside, their zone, and they will keep their alignment and balance. And if you come close, they will, take everything and dish out 5 times as hard, but they're not going to be pulled out of balance and be forced to fight on terrain that they are not familiar with. So I think so I think China is going to stay in its corner until the US comes, upon which then the Chinese will fight back, but they will fight back on their own terms.
One last question. How do you think this turns out, this trade war?
I think that the penguins are going to win because it's not going to hurt them, and I think China is going to come a close second. It's not really going to hurt China, but it is certainly going to hurt the United States. In one sense, these tariffs or this tariff negotiation is like somebody coming up to you and holding a gun against their head and saying, Jamal, if you don't negotiate, I'm going to pull this trigger. I'm going to pull this trigger, Jamal. Okay, are you going to negotiate? Under those circumstances?
No. I mean, that's not a negotiation. Like, that's what I keep saying, right? It's not, look, a negotiation, 2 people walk into a room. There's a door on one end, there's a door on the other end. I can walk out that door at any time. You can walk out that door at any time. We can come to a deal, or we can't come to a deal.
Yes.
If we come to a deal, great. If we don't, we can always walk. If I am walking in the room with a gun, that's not negotiation. That's something else. That's a robbery.
Yeah. And it's a robbery predicated on self-harm. I'm going to hurt myself if you don't give me, your wallet. I don't think that's going to happen. It certainly doesn't have the leverage that the ruling imperial elite think that it does. China is simply going to pivot back to domestic production, domestic consumption. It is going to pivot out to all the other countries of the world which are being currently sanctioned and which will be happy to do trade with China, and China will be happy to do trade with them. And then in the meantime, the US is going to have a problem where, people are going to have to start smuggling in Chinese goods, so there'll be a black market, for, Chinese computers and Chinese pens and, Chinese, knickknacks. So I think that's what will happen. And you seem to have frozen. I hope it wasn't the tariffs that got to you already, Jamal. So while we wait for Jamal to come back, perhaps I'm here alone by myself. Just to give you a quick update on Korea, the president of Korea, Yoon Suk-yeol has had his impeachment upheld by the Constitutional Court. They rendered a unanimous verdict 8-1, and the vast majority of Koreans are overjoyed. They're exulting. They were dancing in the streets, literally, that Yoon, who had tried to declare martial law on Korea, that essentially tried to make himself into the dictator of South Korea, has been essentially banished from the political field. What happens next is that South Korea has to undergo an election, a presidential election, within 60 days. And the strongest candidate to win the election is the opposition party leader of the DKP, Lee Jae-myung. He is probably a shoo-in to win unless there are dirty tricks or he suffers another assassination attempt. The US is not happy about this. We can see clearly that it was there were certain centers of power that were putting extraordinary amounts of pressure on South Korea. We think that many people suspect that this is the reason why the decision from the Constitutional Court to impeach Yoon Suk-yeol was so delayed. This took 123 days to render a decision, which was essentially an open and shut case. But if Lee Jae-myung is elected, there will be significant changes in the nature of Korea's relationship both with Japan and likely China. Lee Jae-myung is not happy about the fact that South Korea was forced to go into a trilateral alliance with Japan, US, and Korea as a battering ram against China. This is the trilateral alliance called JACUS. Lee Jae-myung was completely opposed to that, and this was actually one of the initial points of impeachment when Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment was first submitted to the National Assembly. And also Yoon Suk-yeol will balance back towards China, and it will not be a complete and total US vassal used as a proxy to escalate to war against China. And these are considerable shifts, which of course the US does not want. And so I think that we have to watch both the media very carefully as well as the centers of imperial power, depending on the messaging that comes out of the imperial center, and also depending on the media coverage or the media amplification of that messaging, we will know how much mischief is being prepared for the Korean electoral process. Under ordinary conditions, South Korea would simply elect Lee Jae-myung, end of story. But we can see that there are strong institutional forces in the United States, CPAC, Annie Chan, Morse Tan, other organizations, and most recently Fox News, that have come out very, very strongly against the impeachment and have been accusing Lee Jae-myung of being a proxy or an agent of China. So we can see that the information warfare is thickening and heightening, and I think that it's anybody's guess what the next 58 days will yield. So I think that this is something to watch. What happens in Korea will affect the rest of the world. Remember, the Cold War apparatus, the kind of institutional national security state, started with Korea, with the Korean War. It was also the first time that the United States fought China. And it could also be in this kind of circular, chiastic history, the place where that national security state meets its Waterloo, as it were.
Our school is starting to use the vibe word of a lot of different.
Okay, and I'm still not sure what's going on with this feed. It looks like it's still live. I hope Jamal comes back soon. But in the meantime, I will see if I can address some of the questions that are showing up in the chat. Snowman says that Lee Seung-man, who was installed by the U.S., was the Korean Zelensky. I think it's a pretty fair assessment. He was actually living in the United States. He had a degree from Princeton. When Korea was liberated, the U.S. literally flew him out in MacArthur's private jet, and then essentially parachuted him into the Korean presidency. Of course, there was a quote unquote an election, but Syngman Rhee killed off all of his opponents, and this election was only held in the South. The Korean people rose up and overthrew Syngman Rhee in 1960. This was the year that Kennedy was running for president. They actually overthrew him, and again, the U.S. picked up Syngman Rhee and flew him out on a CIA jet back to the United States. And then right after, the U.S. greenlighted another coup in South Korea. And so that South Korea ended up with yet another U.S. quisling dictator. The Koreans have risen up 8 times in their history as a people to throw off an American imposed dictator in 1948, 1960, 1972, 1979, 1980, 1987, 2016, and this year, 2025. Of those 8 times, it has been successful 4 times: in 1960, 1987, 2016 when it threw off Park Geun-hye, and 2025 when it got rid of Yoon Suk-yeol. All of these were U.S. quislings. And generally, these things coincide with transformations or transitions in U.S. political affairs, which simply affirms the fact that South Korea's politics is so deeply tied to U.S. politics. It's a little bit like, the U.S. is the center of political gravity. And so if you look at the night sky and you see different things moving, different celestial bodies moving in retrograde movements or odd, eccentric movements, you're actually seeing the effects of the unseen force, which is the sun. And in this case, the United States is the political sun around which all political bodies circulate, including the Korean state itself. So I think that is important. Once again, I'm just jumping around here, but regarding Korean arms exports, Korea is a major arms exporter, and it didn't get that way by accident. If you look at the large Korean chaebol, the large Korean multinational companies, they got their start as subcontractors during the Vietnam War. Remember, South Korea sent 340,000 troops to the Vietnam War to fight as proxies for the United States. But at the same time, the Korean companies became subcontractors for the U.S. war machine. So we're talking about companies like Hyundai, the company that makes the cars. This company was a subcontractor for Brown and Root, and that's how it became big and powerful. So there is a long history of South Korea serving as this part of the U.S. Military industrial supply chain. And now it is accelerating. During the current conflict in Ukraine, South Korea supplied more shells to Ukraine than all of the EU combined. On the other hand, there's absolutely no proof that North Korea provided anything, not even quote unquote troops to Ukraine. So in this situation, you should really think that this is where the accusation is a confession. The allegations that North Korea has been supplying munitions to Russia are based on three types of evidence. The first is that they have seen container trucks moving towards Russia from the North Korean port. If North Korea were sending shells to Russia, putting them in containers is the very last thing you would want to do, because containers have a certain weight that they can hold. Shells are very, very heavy. And if you were using containers to ship shells, then anywhere from 90 to 95% of the container would have to be empty in order for that container not to be destroyed. And so in times of war, it would be a very, very strange thing to be shipping. It would be a very inefficient thing to be shipping air, essentially air to the front, 95% air to the front, rather than simply putting on, specialized pallets and shipping them. So I think that's one piece of evidence, or, one allegation we can discount. They've also made allegations that they have found parts of a missile that demonstrate that it is North Korean.
I'm sorry, KJ.
Welcome back, Jamal.
My entire internet went down. Like literally everything went down. I am on my phone's hotspot, and I'm hoping that lasts for a little bit. Thank you for carrying and holding it with me. And by the way, if you ever want to carry a show on this channel, let me know. You're, like you said, a teacher specializing in the Asia region. You know your stuff. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for this.
You're welcome.
KJ, please tell people where they can find you, KJ. I had to shut my entire system down and everything else. So
they can find me on the China Report on the Breakthrough News Network. They can also read my writings on Counterpunch, MR Online, LA Progressive, Popular Resistance, etc., various progressive websites. If they really want to dig deep, they can go to Sputnik. On the Sputnik channel, there are about 500 interviews that I have done, both with you and other programs, as well as articles that have been written. So the stuff is out there, but the fact is that I am seriously shadow banned, and clearly for a good reason.
Well, this audience loves you. They keep saying KJ held it down. KJ was awesome. Let KJ finish what he was saying. KJ has done good work. All of that stuff. You have great accolades from this audience. And like I said, whether you're shadow banned or not, you're more than welcome. If I'm sick, infirmed, ill, otherwise not able to show, or if you even wanted to show on this channel.
Thank you. I appreciate.
I'm open to it.
I appreciate the offer.
I really appreciate it.
You have a good one.
You have a good one. Be safe, KJ. Thank you. All right. I don't know how long this is going to last. Apparently, the internet has been down the entire time, and my phone has been the hotspot that has been running this entire show. That is astonishing. I'm glad my phone can carry it in case bad things happen. Let me go to the chats because I don't want to miss it before this dies. KN, there we are. Super sticker. Karine, Akayan, I got to be honest with you. Every time I show this, you look a lot like my ex-wife. It is freaky. Extra medium. Thank you for the truthful analysis, my brother. I do my best. Honest analysis. If I'm wrong, I could be wrong. I always accept I could be wrong. First time, brother, I am not with you. Iran issuing a contract with the Duma today, full military protection, no capitulation. China is there too. The reason I say capitulation, and capitulation may be too aggressive. If the Ayatollah comes out and says no negotiations, and then he says no direct negotiations, and then reporting comes out that, well, we'll have talks with you that are indirect for about an hour, and then we'll have direct talks. That feels like you have gone back on something that's small. Now, if you go back on something that is small, I have questions about what else would you go back on. That's why I say capitulation. Fair enough if you want to take the piss out of me on that. And maybe that's too small to say capitulation. I am in the mindset that they are angling for war. And what Trump is going to want is not something Iran is going to be able to give. Raphael, you could be right. Like I said, I could be wrong on this stuff. Maybe you're right. Maybe it is too strong to say capitulation in the context of we're not going to have direct talks, and then they have direct talks. For me, even that's too much to give. Again, from my mindset, maybe wrong on this, and I may be hyper reactive to this stuff. Bullies should get punched in the nose. They should not be negotiated with. You can't negotiate with them. What they want from you is dominance. They want your submission. Ultimately, that's what they want. When Donald Trump came out and said, Iran said they're going to have direct talks, I'm saying the Ayatollah folded. That's his point. It's not random. It's not arbitrary that he's using that framing of language and saying, they said that they won't talk to me. They're talking to me. Full stop. I'm the alpha. I'm the dominant in this situation. The fact that they're willing to have direct talks with me is a submissive act, considering they said they were not. That's where I'm getting the capitulation from. That's my angle. That's my view. And I could be wrong. You could poke holes in that, and you can come up with reasons why that's not strong enough in order to say capitulation. Fair enough. Fair enough. As I told you, man, I could be wrong. All right, here's the other one. Manny Roos. Bring in Andrei Martynov regarding Russia. That is assuming he comes on the show. Assuming he comes on my show. Diane Thomas, please read my chat, please. I just read it. Francio said it need to, but then what? Frankios said it need to, but completely confused by that chat. Just telling you. Inca, new member, shout out to you. Inca, another one, new member, shout out to you. Thank you very much. For Met Dissident. It seems like race supremacy, sexism, etc., capitalism are ultimately meant for resource hoarding and hegemony. Shout out to you, Mr. Ripley. Has anyone mentioned yet that the video from 1996 of Nancy Pelosi push for reciprocal tariffs against China? I'm sure there's a rational explanation. Mr. Ripley, I'm sure there is too. My system is acting very weird. All right. Thank all of you. You're deeply around. By the way, the Duma is a system acting weird. So I'm going to close this video up while I have time. God damn it. Here's another one. All right. If I can't get to your chat, I'm sorry. I'm trying to ignoring doing your whole series. Wesley Crusher. Completely hated him. Today to do the like Belarus. Oh, I think KJ is right. I don't know if they're going to get directly involved in a war. Russia at least has a security agreement with them, meaning Russia is working with Iran. I would wager to you that Russia is probably the one that told them to go into talks, because all things being equal, Russia doesn't want another war, nor do they want Iran attacked. And I would imagine Iran doesn't want Iran attacked. But again, Iran hasn't done anything to get attacked, right? And so from Russia's point of view, we're not letting them fall. So I don't doubt that Russia would give them military support. I'm doubtful that China would. When I'm saying capitulation, I'm being very specific from the standpoint of having talks after saying you're not having talks. So just be clear. Raphael, shout out to you. Shout out to you. And thank you. And by the way, if I fuck up, take the piss out of me. Is what it is, right? I can make mistakes. I can get it wrong. By capitulation, I don't mean they won't be willing to fight. I think all hell breaks loose if Iran is attacked. I think they will respond accordingly if they're attacked. So I don't mean capitulation in the sense of we're not willing to throw a punch. They will be willing to throw a punch, but they're pragmatic and they're practical. And they have various things that they want to accomplish in war. It's not the thing that they want to accomplish. They're being pushed into this. If I'm walking down the street and somebody walks up to me and threatens me and wants my wallet, okay, this is not me looking for a fight. By the same token, I have every right to beat the shit out of them if they do. I hope you get my point. Yes, they're going to be willing to fight. Yes, they're going to be willing to throw a punch. No, they're not going to sit there and acquiesce to being attacked either by Israel or by the United States. Is that something they want? No. Is that something they're chomping at the bit for? No. I wager that they would do everything that they can to avoid it, and they were willing to give anything that they can to avoid it, short of national sovereignty. So if we want to have conversations about the previous JCPOA, we can do that. Maybe, fair enough. If you're asking me to get rid of my ballistics program, fuck off. If you're asking me to get rid of my support for Hezbollah as Israel commits a genocide, again, fuck off. So I don't mean capitulation in the sense of they will give any and everything that the United States wants. No, not that. Because the reality of it is, at the end of the day, the United States wants to topple Iran. Any negotiation that they involve themselves in right now with the United States and whatever they give is meant for that end. At least that's my point of view. The stated objective is to eliminate Iran off the map, and any negotiation is to make them weaker for that process of elimination, or for that matter, for that process of attack. That's the way I see it. So I don't see this as they're just having a single negotiation for so-and-so. I have this is a means to an end to weaken the state, to allow other forces to either knock over the state, either through military force or through internal discipline. That's how I view it. So just to be very clear, I don't doubt that they will fight. I don't doubt that Russia would assist them in maintaining the integrity of the state. I just mean capitulation in a very sense of we're willing to talk or we're not willing to negotiate. And then all of a sudden, you're having direct negotiations after an hour of indirect negotiations. I don't see a big difference between indirect and direct, even though I know that's their way of trying to save face. All right. Raphael, shout out to you for telling me I'm full of shit. So I appreciate that. Honestly, I do. This is not an echo chamber. I don't want my audience to be like, yes, sir, and move on. I hate that shit. The word was too strong. Fair enough. Fair enough. When I cut the clip, I will remove capitulate. Fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. Oh, this is MUOU are talking from the back of the mic. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. This is where it's supposed to be. The mic's right. All right. I'm going to end this. The word is too strong. Fair enough. I accept that. I accept that. I totally accept that. All right. I'm going to thank all of you. I'm going to thank all of you for waiting for me to come back after everything went to shit. I appreciate all of you and I thank you. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. StreamYard is acting weird. Yeah, I'm going to have to reset. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share, subscribe. I want to thank all of you for joining me today. I think we had a really good show. And I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 129. Signing off.